Before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. The tires hummed steadily beneath the SUV as it wound deeper into the forest, the sound mingling with the low rumble of distant thunder. Hannah adjusted her grip on the steering wheel, glancing at the GPS one more time. The signal had already flickered out twice in the past hour, and now it was frozen, stubbornly pointing down a dirt road that barely looked like it had been driven on in years. Still no service? Mark asked from the passenger seat, peering at his own phone. He tapped the screen and shook his head. Nope. Nothing. I think we're on our own now, he said, forcing a laugh. This is how horror movies start, right? In the back seat, Alyssa and Jordan exchanged a quick glance but said nothing. The four of them had been planning this trip for months, a weekend getaway to an old, out-of-use campground that Mark claimed his uncle had told him about years ago. It was supposed to be isolated, untouched, a hidden gem nestled somewhere in the northern woods. No cell towers. No crowds. Just the sound of wind through the trees and the crackle of firewood. Now, with the GPS frozen, the daylight fading behind a wall of clouds, and the road narrowing to little more than a rut-filled trail, the idea didn't feel quite as exciting. Are you sure this is it? Hannah asked, slowing the vehicle as branches scraped along the windows. It looks like we're driving straight into the woods. Mark leaned closer to the windshield. The trees had grown so dense, the branches above knit tightly enough to block out much of the sky. It was like driving into a tunnel, but instead of concrete, the walls were made of bark and shadow. This is the turn he mentioned, Mark said. He said there'd be a split in the trees. A kind of old forestry road. It used to lead to the campground. He said, Alyssa muttered. That's not the same as knowing. Relax, Jordan said, half laughing, but there was a tension in his voice. We're fine. Worst case, we pitch tents wherever the car gives out. The car dipped suddenly as one wheel sank into a pothole. Hannah cursed under her breath and gripped the wheel tighter. They were barely crawling now, the road twisting and curving unnaturally. A thick mist was starting to gather at ground level, not quite fog, but something close. The trees seemed taller here, thicker, darker. Then the road simply stopped. It wasn't a dead end. Not exactly. It was as if the path they were on just faded into the forest floor. 1 second there were tire tracks, packed dirt, crushed grass, and the next, nothing. Just pine needles and uneven roots. Hannah brought the car to a halt. Okay. Nope, she said, shifting the car into park. I'm not driving into that. The silence that followed was heavy. No birds. No wind. Just the ticking sound of the engine cooling and the occasional creak of branches above them. They all got out of the car, stretching and blinking at the strange quiet. The air smelled like moss and rain-soaked earth. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear water, maybe a creek, maybe a small river, but it was muffled, like it was coming from far below them rather than ahead. Mark pulled out an old printed map, unfolded it carefully, and traced his finger along a line. We're close. Like, half a mile on foot, tops. Alyssa raised an eyebrow. And you're sure that's half a mile that won't lead us in circles? It's wilderness, not a labyrinth, he said. But he didn't sound sure. Still, they gathered their bags and flashlights and locked the SUV behind them. The path ahead was uneven but passable. The forest was dense, the air cool and damp. Every few steps, one of them would glance over their shoulder, not because they heard anything, but because it felt like they should have. They reached a clearing about 20 minutes later. It was small, overgrown, and surrounded by towering pines whose needles swallowed most of the light. The sky had turned a dull silver behind the clouds, and that strange low mist clung to the grass. But there was a fire pit in the center of the clearing, old and ringed with stones. Nearby, half buried under leaves and mud, was a wooden post. Faded lettering carved into it read, Welcome to Fern Hollow Campground. I told you, Mark said, grinning. Hannah gave him a half smile. Okay, point for you. They set up camp quickly. 2 tents. A pile of dry firewood Mark had brought in a tarp. Jordan managed to get a small flame going, and soon the orange glow of firelight pushed the shadows back. The tension started to ease a little. They made dinner. Told jokes. Shared memories from college and other camping trips. And for a little while, it really did feel like a getaway, like they'd escaped the noise of the world and found something peaceful again. But then the woods changed. It started subtly, the wind picking up without warning. The mist getting thicker, snaking between trees like it had weight. The fire, which had been burning steadily, began flickering strangely, as if reacting to something none of them could see. Then came the sound. It was faint. So faint that Hannah wasn't sure if she was imagining it. A dragging noise. Like something wet being pulled across the forest floor. It came from the direction they'd arrived from, but when they shined their lights that way, there was only darkness and fog. Did you hear that? She asked. Everyone paused. The dragging stopped. Yeah, Jordan said slowly. That wasn't a raccoon. The fire hissed, just for a second, as if the air itself had turned cold. And then, all at once, the clearing felt too small. Like the trees were closer than before. Like there were too many trunks. Too many shadows between them. We should get some rest, Mark said, clearing his throat. Long hike tomorrow. No one argued. They zipped into their tents, flashlights on low, trying to laugh it off. But sleep didn't come easily. Outside, the wind kept shifting directions. And every so often, beneath the whispering pines, came that sound again. A slow, dragging shuffle. Coming closer. And then stopping. Always just before you dared look. The forest held its breath. Inside the tent, Hannah lay still, her eyes wide open in the dark. Her flashlight sat beside her sleeping bag, casting a faint cone of light against the nylon wall. Every crackle of the fire outside sounded like a footstep. Every shift of the wind was a whisper just beyond the thin fabric. She told herself it was just nerves, the isolation, the fog, the unsettling quiet, but that dragging noise from earlier still echoed in her head like it had come from right beside her. She turned over slowly and checked her phone. Still no service. Not even a flicker of a bar. The time read 2:17 a.m. In the other tent, she could just barely hear Mark's soft breathing, steady and slow. Jordan and Alyssa were likely asleep too, though she doubted they were sleeping well. No one had talked much after crawling into their tents. It was as if the forest had drained the words from them, left them hushed and uneasy. Then, just as she began to drift toward sleep, it happened again. A soft crunch just outside. Then another. Something stepping through the underbrush. It wasn't a raccoon. It wasn't some foraging animal. The pattern was too deliberate, one step at a time, slow and heavy, like someone walking barefoot through the cold needles. Dragging something behind them. Crunch. Shuffle. Crunch. Stop. She didn't breathe. Her hand hovered over her flashlight. She heard it move again, closer this time. Right past the tent. The sound of something brushing against the fabric, just gently enough to be unmistakable. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes burned from not blinking. The fire had gone out. She knew it, even without looking. The temperature had dropped, the air grown still. The only sound now was that slow, raspy dragging across the wet forest floor. She gathered every bit of courage she had and unzipped the side of the tent just an inch, not enough to be seen, just enough to look. Outside, the fog had thickened. It pressed between the trees like a living thing, swirling in unnatural currents. But it wasn't empty. Just beyond the reach of her flashlight, something moved. It was tall. Not quite human in shape, too long in the limbs, too still. It didn't walk so much as glide, but with a jerking rhythm, like a puppet pulled along a track. She couldn't see its face, if it even had one, but she felt the cold attention of it, the certainty that it knew she was watching. Then, without a sound, it turned and slipped into the fog. Gone. Hannah didn't sleep after that. When morning came, it did so slowly, as if the sun had to fight its way through the canopy. The fog lingered, pale and wet, draped over the clearing like a forgotten sheet. The fire was dead. The embers cold. Mark was already up, standing near the fire pit, arms crossed, staring into the trees. He looked pale. "You didn't sleep either?" Hannah asked, stepping out of her tent. He shook his head slowly. "Something came through here last night." Jordan and Alyssa joined them a minute later, both clearly exhausted. "You heard it too?" Alyssa asked. "That dragging sound?" Jordan nodded. "I thought I was dreaming at first. But it got right up next to our tent." They stood in silence for a moment, the forest pressing in around them. Then Mark knelt by the edge of the clearing. "Guys," he said quietly. "Look at this." They all gathered around. The soil was damp from last night's mist, soft enough to take an impression, and there, just on the edge of the camp, was a trail. Not quite a footprint, but something. A long groove, like something had been pulled. As if something heavy had been dragged through the brush, right past their tents. And worse, there were marks beside it. Not boot prints. Not shoes. But long, narrow indents. Too long for an animal. Too deep for something so light to leave. "What the hell kind of animal makes that?" Jordan asked. "It wasn't an animal," Hannah said quietly. They all turned to her. She didn't know how to explain what she'd seen, what it had felt like to look into the mist and feel that thing looking back, so she didn't. She just shook her head and said, "We should go." Mark pulled the map from his pack. "We can't just head back. If we go out the way we came in, we'll be walking for hours. But look," he pointed to a trail on the paper, one that curved around a nearby ridge. "My uncle said this path leads to an old ranger station. Maybe 10, 12 miles max. If we follow it, we might find help. Or at least a radio." "You sure it's still there?" Alyssa asked. "No," Mark admitted. "But I don't want to stay here another night." Nobody argued. They packed up camp in silence, moving faster than before, every one of them flinching at the smallest sounds, a snapping twig, a gust of wind. The map's trail wasn't visible at first, but Mark led the way, using terrain and landmarks his uncle had described years ago. The trees were dense, the path barely a game trail. No signs, no markers. After nearly 2 hours of hiking, the forest grew even darker. The fog refused to lift, and the air had a strange, sour smell, like something wet and old had been left to rot. Then they found it. A tree. Or what was left of it. It had been splintered at the base, not cut by a saw or felled by weather, but torn. Jagged edges, like the trunk had been twisted until it snapped. Around its base were strange marks in the dirt, deep gouges in the shape of wide fingers. And in the center of the gouges was something else. A piece of cloth. Faded, torn, damp. It looked like the corner of a jacket. Alyssa bent to pick it up and froze. On the edge of the fabric, nearly worn away by mud and time, were letters in faded stitching. FH Ranger Division. Fern Hollow. "What if this wasn't storm damage?" she whispered. Mark took the cloth gently, his fingers trembling. "We need to keep moving." But the forest had other ideas. Within the hour, the trail began looping. Places they had passed, trees, stumps, even a rusted old sign half buried in moss, started showing up again. They marked a tree with a knife. 10 minutes later, they passed it again. Jordan stopped dead. Okay, no. This is messed up. It's like the forest is moving around us, Alyssa said. Mark was looking at the map, turning it slowly, eyes narrowing. Or we're not where we think we are. No, Hannah said. We're being led. The others stared at her. She pointed to the marks on the ground, subtle, but there. A groove. A path. Like something had passed this way before. We're not lost. Something wants us to go this way. No one said a word. Then, ahead of them, just barely visible through the trees, was a cabin. The cabin stood crooked beneath the shrouded trees, half sunken into the forest floor like it had grown there rather than been built. Time had not been kind to it. The roof sagged in the middle, its shingles dark with moss and rot. The wooden siding was warped and split in places, and a section of the front porch had collapsed inward, exposing the foundation beneath, if there even was one. Fog clung to the base of the structure, swirling around it like breath. A single shutter hung askew, clicking softly in the wind, the only sound in a heavy silence. They stood still for a long moment, just staring. No way that's on your map, Hannah said, her voice hushed, like speaking too loud might wake something. Mark didn't answer. He turned the map over in his hands, scanning it as if a second look might summon the cabin into existence. But the paper was just as blank in that area as before. Nothing, he said finally. It shouldn't be here. I don't like this, Alyssa whispered. It feels wrong. Like it's waiting. It's shelter, Jordan said, stepping forward. And it's getting colder. He was right. Though it was midday, the forest felt like twilight. The fog had thickened further, muting the light into a perpetual dusk. And now, the cold had a different edge to it, not just physical, but emotional. Like standing beside a grave that no one remembered. I don't want to go in there, Alyssa said. Please. But they were tired. Hungry. Cold. And the forest had been shifting behind them, the paths bleeding into one another, time slipping strangely. The cabin may not have been on any map, but it was there. Solid. Unmoving. Hannah approached first, her boots crunching softly on the pine needles. As she reached the porch, she hesitated, peering into the shadows beneath the overhang. The wood smelled old. Wet. Like it had soaked in years of decay. The door was slightly open, the gap dark and silent. Mark joined her, pushing gently on the wood. The door creaked open with a long groan, revealing a single-room interior choked in shadow. Dust particles hung in the air like tiny floating insects, disturbed by the sudden draft. The only window was cracked and covered in grime, letting in just enough light to see a broken table, a few empty chairs, and a wood stove long dead and rusted. Jordan stepped inside behind them, shining his flashlight in wide arcs. The beam passed over the fireplace and landed on a wall at the back. And they saw it. A large, dark handprint, smeared across the wall in something that looked disturbingly like dried blood. 4 fingers. Long uneven. The palm misshapen. Alyssa stopped at the door, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Guys, we shouldn't be in here. But they were already too deep. Mark walked over to the wall and looked closer at the handprint. It's old. Maybe animal blood. Or paint. Do animals leave handprints? Hannah asked flatly. The cabin had no scent of rot or death. No recent signs of life. But it felt wrong all the same. The air inside was still, but heavy, like it had been trapped for decades. Every breath felt a little harder. Every movement a little slower. And in the far corner, there was something else. A trapdoor. Jordan spotted it first, partially obscured by a collapsed chair and some rotting floorboards. The metal ring handle had rusted, but not completely. There were faint scratches around it, like it had been opened, and closed, more than once. Nope, Alyssa said, backing up. We are not opening that. But curiosity is a tricky thing in isolation. When you've been walking in circles for hours, haunted by sounds you can't explain and roads that don't lead anywhere, even a trapdoor can start to feel like an answer. Jordan tugged it open. The hinges shrieked. A plume of dust and cold air rushed out, carrying with it a stench of mildew, damp earth, and something else, something coppery and stale. He shined his flashlight down. The stairs descended into pitch black, disappearing after just a few feet. Wood steps, narrow and warped. The walls were stone, or perhaps packed earth, hard to tell. But the passage felt old. Older than the cabin itself. Like it had been dug for a different purpose, long before the building above it was ever constructed. Mark knelt beside it. Looks like some kind of cellar. Or a bunker, Jordan said. Or a root basement. Or a grave, Alyssa added. The others looked at her. I'm not trying to be dramatic, she continued, her voice shaking. But none of this makes sense. We followed a trail that didn't exist to a cabin that doesn't belong on any map. We're walking in circles. We're hearing things in the woods. And now there's a hidden tunnel under a house that's falling apart, but hasn't collapsed completely despite looking 100 years old. She stepped back. We're being led. You said that earlier, Hannah. I think you were right. Something wants us to go down there. That gave them all pause. But again, silence crept in. The fog outside was so thick now it had started to press against the windows, curling in through the broken glass like fingers. Going outside felt like walking into the belly of a creature that had already swallowed them whole. So Jordan went first. He stepped down into the trapdoor carefully, flashlight held out before him. Each step groaned beneath his weight. The others followed slowly, Mark next, then Hannah, then Alyssa last, who lingered for a long time before finally descending. The temperature dropped the farther they went. At the bottom was a small underground room. Stone walls, dirt floor. Cold seeped up through their boots. There were shelves along one side, holding rusted cans, shattered jars, old tools. In the back corner, an oil lamp sat on a table, beside what looked like an old, leather-bound book. Jordan lit the lamp. The flame bloomed to life, casting dancing shadows across the room. That's when they saw it. Drawings. All along the walls. Scratched into the stone with something sharp, the images formed a repeating pattern. Trees. Circles. Eyes. Dozens of eyes, wide, hollow, staring. Overlapping symbols that spiral toward the center, where a single figure stood, tall, thin, with arms too long and a face without features. It was the thing Hannah had seen in the fog. It's real, she said softly. I saw it last night. The room felt colder. The walls seemed to lean in slightly. Mark picked up the book and opened it. Pages flaked at the corners, the ink smeared by moisture and time. But some of it was still legible. The woods do not forget. He watches from the hollow places, where light dares not go. The deeper you go, the more real he becomes. On the next page was a rough sketch, the figure again. The same shape. Same empty face. Jordan turned toward the wall of eyes. One of them blinked. He stumbled backward, hitting the table hard. The oil lamp tipped, and shattered. Flames erupted for an instant, then sputtered, then died. Darkness. Total. And then, in the silence, came a whisper. Not from one of them. Not from anywhere they could see. Just a voice, low and rasping, so close it might have been inside the stone itself. You shouldn't have found me. Darkness swallowed everything. The broken oil lamp hissed softly as its last flickers died, leaving only the sound of their breath, sharp, ragged, overlapping. None of them moved at first. It was as if the whisper had frozen their bodies, locking them in that cold, underground space where time no longer felt like it belonged to them. Hannah's flashlight beam finally cut through the dark, jittering wildly as her hand shook. The stone walls came into view again, damp, ancient, covered in scratchings that no longer looked like just drawings. Now, in the half-light, they resembled claw marks, or desperate attempts to write something before the writer vanished. Mark was crouched by the broken table, breathing fast. Jordan stood motionless, his back pressed against the wall, staring at the eye that had blinked. Alyssa hadn't screamed, but her face was drained of color, her lips barely moving as she whispered to herself, some internal prayer or mantra to block out what they'd just heard. But the voice lingered. Not in the air, exactly. In the walls. In the floor. In the stone. It felt as though the cabin had exhaled, and now something else had taken in that breath and was holding it. Jordan finally spoke. "Tell me someone else heard that." "I heard it," Hannah said. "We all heard it," Alyssa whispered. Mark's voice was hoarse. "What does it mean, you shouldn't have found me?" "I don't know," Hannah said. "But we need to go. Now." A rumble passed through the cellar. Not loud, not violent, but unmistakable. A vibration that started in their bones and ended in their teeth. The walls seemed to shiver, dust sifting down from the ceiling like flour shaken from an old cloth. The air smelled suddenly older, thick with stone, mildew, and something else, metallic. Copper and iron. Blood. Hannah turned toward the stairwell. The trapdoor was closed. "No. No, no, no," she whispered, rushing up the steps two at a time. She pushed. Nothing. Slammed her shoulder into it. Still nothing. "It's stuck," she yelled down. "It's jammed or something." Mark was beside her in seconds, bracing his shoulder and heaving against the door, his boots scraping for leverage. The wood groaned but didn't budge. "It was open," Jordan said. "It was open when we came down." "I didn't close it," Alyssa whispered. "None of us did," Hannah said. They pushed again. No change. And then they heard it. A soft creak above. Not the door. The floorboards. Something was moving around the cabin above them, slow, deliberate footsteps, each one heavier than the last. Not the weight of boots, something barefoot, maybe. Something that didn't mind the cold. Then, dragging. That same wet, pulpy shuffle they'd heard outside the tents. Hannah backed away from the door, light trembling in her hand. The footsteps stopped. Directly above the trapdoor. Silence. Then. Knock. One loud, deliberate knock on the wood above them. Not fast. Not frantic. Just a single, slow command. Mark stumbled back. Alyssa let out a sob and covered her mouth. Jordan raised his flashlight to the ceiling, as if it would pierce through the wood. "Whoever you are," he called out, his voice shaking, "we're just passing through. We didn't mean to." Knock. Louder this time. The sound echoed through the cellar like a gunshot in a cave. Hannah stepped forward. "Stop," she hissed. "Don't speak to it." "What do you mean it?" Jordan asked. "You think that's not a person?" Hannah shook her head. "Whatever this is, it's not just some guy. I saw it. In the fog. It moved like nothing I've ever seen. And this," she gestured to the scratched drawings on the wall, "someone was afraid of it. Afraid enough to carve these all over the walls." Suddenly, the trapdoor cracked. A long, jagged split ran down its center, splintering outward as something heavy pressed from above. The wood creaked. Groaned. Gave another inch. Dust rained down. A second split tore across it, this one horizontal. "We have to get out of here," Alyssa said, backing away from the stairwell. "There's nowhere else to go," Jordan said. "Unless you want to dig through that." He pointed to the back wall, where the stone looked slightly different, like it had been sealed. The etchings on that wall were more violent, the scratch marks deeper. And in the center of them, a narrow crack. Almost a doorway. Hannah moved toward it, her flashlight dancing across the rough edges. "Help me," she said. This was blocked off. Someone didn't want it opened. Then why open it? Alyssa asked. Because whatever's up there, Hannah looked back at the cracking trapdoor. Might be worse. Mark grabbed a rusted metal bar from the shelf and began slamming it into the side of the wall. With each blow, dust and stone crumbled free. Jordan joined in with an old hammer, his strikes frantic. Alyssa stood near the base of the stairs, eyes fixed upward, flinching with every groan from the wood above. Then the final plank of the trapdoor gave a sharp pop, splitting apart, leaving a jagged hole. And through it, something reached down. A long arm, too long, extending slowly from the shadows above. The skin was pale and damp, stretched tight over bone. The fingers were disproportionate, curling inward like claws. They didn't grope blindly. They reached with purpose. Straight for Alyssa. She screamed, backing away just in time as the fingers scraped against her shoulder. The thing above the door gave a low, breathless growl, not vocal cords, but the sound of air being forced through a place where it didn't belong. The wall cracked. Jordan broke through first, shoving aside a section of the stone to reveal a narrow, sloping passage on the other side. Not a room. A tunnel. Pitch black and descending. "Go!" Hannah yelled. "Go now!" They scrambled through the opening one by one, Hannah pulling Alyssa behind her as the arm above thrust farther into the room, dragging its nails along the stone, gouging it like soft chalk. A second arm followed, the same grotesque proportions, the same dead color. Jordan was already halfway down the tunnel, his flashlight illuminating rough dirt walls and old wooden braces, warped and cracked from moisture. Hannah pushed Alyssa ahead and then turned back. She looked one final time through the trapdoor. A face was forming above it. Pale. Shifting. Almost human, but wrong. As if it were trying to remember what a face was supposed to look like. Eyes that weren't eyes. A mouth that stretched wider than it should, full of a blackness that seemed to drink the life. And then it smiled. Not wide. Not cruel. Glad. It had found them. They ran. The narrow tunnel swallowed them in darkness, their flashlights trembling as they staggered downward through damp earth and crumbling stone. The walls seemed to close in with every step, packed dirt lined with warped wooden beams, old support struts so decayed they groaned at the slightest brush. Their breaths echoed. Their footsteps echoed. And yet, nothing else did. No sound came from behind them. That should have been a relief. It wasn't. Hannah kept glancing over her shoulder. She could still feel it, that smile. That awful, knowing expression staring down through the broken trapdoor. Not angry. Not hungry. Just patient. Like it had all the time in the world. "How far does this go?" Jordan called out, panting, the beam of his light bouncing wildly against the tunnel walls. "I don't know," Mark said. "It wasn't on the map. None of this is." They moved as fast as they could without slipping. The tunnel sloped downward at a shallow angle, but it didn't stop. It twisted occasionally, veering left or right, sometimes narrowing until they had to turn sideways to squeeze through. Somewhere behind them, Alyssa tripped and fell hard. Hannah turned, rushing back. "Are you okay?" "I think I hit something," Alyssa whispered, her voice shaky. She pushed herself up on her elbows and turned her flashlight back toward the floor. It wasn't rock. It felt soft. She aimed the light, and froze. So did everyone else. Lying on the tunnel floor, half covered in dirt and tangled in roots, was a shoe. A hiking boot. Old. Molded. Cracked. But still mostly intact. And inside it was a foot, A human foot, still in the boot, still laced, but mummified. Shriveled. Like it had been down here for years. Alyssa scrambled back, her hands shaking violently. "Oh God, oh God." "Don't look," Hannah said, turning her flashlight away. "Just keep moving." But they found more. As they pressed deeper into the tunnel, the walls began to change. Not structurally, visually. Symbols appeared. Etched into the packed earth, almost identical to the ones in the cellar. Circles. Trees. Eyes. A tall figure with limbs that bent in all the wrong ways. And names. Carved roughly. Some barely readable. N. Hardy. R. Clemens. W. S. March 12, 88. Help me. Still here. IT doesn't sleep. Mark ran his fingers along one of the names. These weren't scratched out in panic, he murmured. They were recorded. Someone wanted them remembered. They were trapped down here, Alyssa said. We're trapped down here, Jordan replied. Then the tunnel changed again. The floor leveled. The dirt became stone. Not natural rock, but cut, smooth and deliberate, like it had been carved out by hand. The support beams vanished, replaced by low, arching ceilings. Here, the air felt colder, heavier. And there was no mistaking the smell now. Rot. Not fresh. Not strong. But old and baked into the very air. The kind of rot that hadn't been alive in a long time. They slowed. Their footsteps quieter. And then they saw it. An opening ahead, wider, domed, with jagged stone columns rising up from the ground like teeth. Inside, the floor dipped down into a shallow basin, and in the center of it all, was a circle. A perfect ring of stones, blackened and cracked. A fire pit. But the stones weren't just arranged. They were fused. Melted together by heat so intense it had turned the stone to slag. Around the edges of the circle were piles of old bones, animal or human, it was impossible to tell. Every surface was charred black. What is this place? Mark whispered. It's some kind of ritual site, Hannah said. She didn't want to believe it, but the symbols surrounding the basin confirmed it. The figure again, taller now, arms outstretched, face stretched in a silent scream. A shrine. And something had been here recently. There were footprints in the dust. Bare footprints. Large. Inhumanly wide. 6 toes. Deep enough to suggest weight. The prints circled the fire pit again and again before disappearing into a smaller tunnel on the far side of the room. I'm not going that way, Alyssa said. I'm not following that. We can't go back, Mark said. That thing, whatever it is, it's waiting for us. Hunting us. The tunnel might lead out. Or deeper, Jordan said. It might go deeper. We can't just sit here, Hannah said. We need to move. While we still can. They crossed the chamber carefully, stepping around the bones and ash. As they passed the fire pit, the temperature dropped again, sharp and sudden. Each of them exhaled pale clouds into the air, their breath fogging like it was winter. And then the whispering began. Not out loud. Inside. One by one, they paused. Turned. Looked around. Did you hear that? Alyssa asked, clutching her temples. Hannah nodded. Her ears rang faintly, like after a fire alarm. But beneath that was something else, words. Or fragments of words. Repeating. Twisting. Don't go. Don't leave me here. It needs more. It wants more. Mark clutched the old journal from the cellar tightly in both hands, flipping it open and scanning the pages. There's something here, he muttered. Something old. Something that was worshipped. Maybe bound. They did something to hold it here, but it only lasted as long as someone kept the fires burning. He looked up at the cold, blackened pit. But the fire went out. Jordan stared down at it. Who would worship this? Desperate people, Hannah said. Or people who thought they could control it. A gust of wind blew through the tunnel behind them. Only, it wasn't wind. It was breath. Slow. Wet. Close. They turned as one. And for a moment, just a heartbeat, they saw something at the entrance to the tunnel they'd come from. A shape. Huge. Leaning just slightly into the chamber. Watching. Its arms scraped the stone walls as it moved. Its head tilted unnaturally. And when its eyes caught the beam of Hannah's flashlight, they didn't glow. They absorbed. The beam vanished as soon as it touched them, like light itself refused to exist in their gaze. Run! Mark shouted. They bolted toward the far tunnel, ducking low and stumbling through the archway as a deafening screech filled the chamber, not high-pitched like an animal, but low and guttural. A sound made by something with lungs full of dirt and time. Behind them, stone cracked. The shrine collapsed. And then came the dragging again, louder this time. Faster. Closer. But they didn't look back. Not yet. They ran deeper, into the dark, the tunnel twisting like a snake's spine, no longer carved by hands but worn by something else. Something that had lived in it. Slept in it. Waited. And ahead, the path split. 3 tunnels. Each identical. Each silent. No signs. No markings. Just earth. Stone. Cold. And the certainty that one of them led out, while the others didn't. The 3 tunnels waited. Each mouth gaped open before them like the hollow throat of some buried thing. No markers. No scent of wind. Just an unnatural stillness in all directions. Behind them, the sound of cracking stone had stopped. So had the dragging. But that didn't mean it was gone. Whatever was stalking them in the dark, the thing that had smiled through the trapdoor and watched them flee into the earth, it wasn't gone. It had just paused. Hannah turned in a slow circle, her flashlight tracing the tunnel walls, illuminating nothing but damp stone and clawed carvings. Her chest rose and fell sharply. Left, she said. Jordan looked at her. You sure? No, she replied, voice tight. But we can't stand here. Mark pulled the old journal from under his jacket again, flipping through the pages like the answer might be hiding in a crease he'd missed. There's nothing in here about a tunnel split. No map. Just ramblings. Warnings. He held it open for them to see. On the next page, someone had scrawled the same phrase over and over in black ink. They went left and never came back. They went left and never came back. They went left and never came back. The ink was smeared in places. Some of the words had been scratched out with something sharp. The last line had been etched directly into the paper, the pen had torn through it. Alyssa stared at it and took a slow step back. Well, that settles it, she said. We're not going left. Jordan pointed toward the right tunnel. Then we go this way. But Mark kept flipping. Another page. New handwriting. Shakier. Almost childlike. It read. They went right and fed the thing. The ink had pooled beneath those words, darker than the others. A handprint stained the bottom corner, not drawn, but pressed. The print looked human. But there were too many fingers. Hannah blinked. Then, middle. Alyssa's voice shook. What if middle's worse? What if they all are? Mark asked. They stood in silence. The tunnel stared back. No clues. No sounds. And then, softly, the whispering returned. From the tunnel to the right. Not a voice this time. Not words. Laughter. Giddy. Muffled. Like a child playing hide and seek. It rose in pitch, echoing faintly against the stone. A second voice joined it, deeper. Ragged. Almost like it was mimicking the first. Then it stopped. Jordan gritted his teeth. Middle. We go middle. We pick one and we run. They agreed, silently. No one wanted to hear what the other two tunnels would offer next. So they turned, and stepped into the center path. The air changed almost immediately. The tunnel narrowed, forcing them into single file. The ground grew slick, coated in a thin layer of something wet and granular, mud or rot or both. Their footsteps squelched softly as they moved, the walls pressing close enough to brush shoulders. The silence returned, broken only by the rhythmic beep of Mark's watch every half hour. He checked it again now. Almost 7 p.m., he said. Alyssa laughed bitterly. Feels like we've been down here for days. They continued. Sometimes the tunnel turned. Sometimes it sloped. But it never opened. It just kept going. As if it had no end. The deeper they went, the stranger the walls looked. Once, Jordan's flashlight revealed bones pressed into the dirt, small, fragile. Rib bones. Vertebrae. Some still had scraps of clothing fused to them. No one spoke when they passed those. Then came the change. The tunnel widened into a chamber, though this one wasn't empty. Wooden crates, rusted tools, lanterns, and canvas sacks lay scattered across the floor like someone had moved in long ago and never finished unpacking. They stepped into the space cautiously, flashlights sweeping across relics from another time. Someone lived here, Hannah said. A small cot sat against one wall, moldy, rotted through. Beside it, an old, rust-covered stove leaned at an angle. Nearby, something like a makeshift desk was pinned with yellowed papers. Mark stepped closer, brushing dust from one. It's a journal, he said. Not the same handwriting as the other one. Different author. It's dated. He squinted. 1962. He read aloud. They come at night. I can hear them laughing just past the tunnel. I block it off. Stack rocks. Doesn't matter. They still come. A second page. Can't leave. Tried once. Walked for 8 hours. Came back to my own camp. And a third. Stopped lighting the fire. Doesn't help. Just makes them hungry. Jordan looked around. Where's the body? They searched. Nothing. No remains. No sign of who'd written it. But something else lay behind the crates. A door. Or rather, what was left of one. A thick slab of iron half buried in stone, chained shut with multiple lengths of rusted steel. Symbols had been scratched into the frame, those same looping eyes, those same impossible figures. A warning. Alyssa whispered, someone sealed this from our side. Jordan stepped closer. Maybe it's a way out. Or maybe it's what they were trying to keep in, Mark said, stepping forward and placing a hand gently against the cold metal. Or keep us from reaching. The door rattled. Just a vibration, soft and sudden, like something brushing the other side. Then a sound. Wet. Clicking. Like teeth. Or claws. Then the chains twitched. Just once. Mark jumped back. Nope. Nope, nope. A thud hit the door. Then another. From the inside. Hannah backed away, her light darting back to the tunnel. But it was gone. Where they'd come from, the tunnel that had led them here, it was no longer there. Just a smooth wall of stone. No, Alyssa whispered, spinning around. It was right here. I saw it. We came from that direction. They tried the other side, where the tunnel should have continued. Also sealed. No crack. No turn. Just walls. They were boxed in. Then came the voice again. Not laughter this time. Not whispering. But a growl. Right at the edge of understanding. You're in the deep now. The chains on the door went slack. The chains slithered to the floor like dead snakes. One by one, the links fell with a soft clink that echoed far louder than it should have in the stone chamber. The iron slabs didn't creak. They didn't groan. The sealed doors simply shifted, just slightly, a breath, a subtle draw backward, as if something on the other side had placed its weight against it, testing it. And it had decided it was time. No, Alyssa whispered. No, we're not doing this. We're not doing this. She rushed to the fallen chains, dragging one up with trembling hands, trying to hook it back into place. The rusted iron slipped through her fingers like oiled rope. Mark joined her, grabbing another chain. Help me. We can seal it again. But it was no use. There were no locks. No latches. The door had been held shut, not by hinges, but by force. And whatever had kept it sealed was no longer here. A cold wind rushed from the crack where the door had shifted, a single breath of something vast and wrong, like opening the lid of a coffin buried in ice. The air didn't smell like rot this time. It smelled like nothing. Like a place that had never known sunlight. Never known life. Jordan stumbled back, flashlight flicking across the wall. We need to find another way out. There is no other way out, Hannah said, eyes locked on the shifting gap in the door. It's sealed behind us. It wants us here. She didn't say what everyone else was thinking. It had been leading them from the beginning. Not the forest. Not the fog. It. From the moment they stepped off the trail. From the moment the fire went out. From the moment Hannah saw the figure in the mist. They had never chosen the path. They had been herded. Steered. And now they were in its den. A second breath slipped through the doorway. This time, it wasn't wind. It was movement. Slow. Deliberate. A low scrape of something heavy sliding across stone. Something with weight but no clear shape. A silhouette that shifted when you weren't looking, always just out of full view. Jordan raised his flashlight and pointed it through the narrow crack. He should never have done that. The beam flickered. Then dimmed. Then turned off entirely. He smacked the flashlight against his palm. Dead. It was working seconds ago. So did Mark's. And Hannah's. And Alyssa's. All four beams faded at once, leaving only the faint glow from Mark's watch screen. EMP. Mark whispered, trying to reason with something his mind couldn't grasp. Static. Maybe the stone. And then, from the other side of the door, a hand slid through. But it wasn't reaching. It was feeling. Long fingers, too many, bending in ways they shouldn't. The skin looked stretched, glistening like something that had once been human but had forgotten how to hold a shape. The arm followed next, bending at odd angles, dragging along the floor without friction. Then it stopped. As if it were listening. The fingers slowly curled around one of the fallen chains, lifting it like a toy. Then it began to play with it. Tapping the links against the stone. 1, 2, 3. The sound rhythmically echoed like a clock ticking in a cathedral. Tick. 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 Hannah whispered, "It's counting." Jordan backed away until his shoulders hit the opposite wall. "What do you mean, it's counting?" 3 chains, Hannah said. 3 tunnels. 3 knocks on the trapdoor. Everything in threes. It's part of its rhythm. The hand released the chain. And slipped back into the crack. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, boom, the door slammed open. But not with noise. With pressure. A force hit them like a sudden drop in gravity. Not wind. Not heat. But an overwhelming presence. Every candle extinguished. Every thought paused. Every bone in their bodies seemed to tighten at once. And then came the sound. A shuffling. A dragging. Heavy limbs scraping the floor. Something entering the chamber not with speed, but with certainty. A slow descent from something older than movement. They couldn't see it. Their eyes wouldn't let them. Every time the light touched the space beyond the door, it flickered, not electronically, but as if the darkness itself refused illumination. A place that had no shadow because it was shadow. And it was watching them. Then something moved across the floor. Not toward them, between them. Alyssa gasped as she was pulled. Not lifted. Not snatched. Just taken, like a thread being drawn back into a needle. No. Mark lunged for her, catching her wrist just as her feet left the ground. Her scream tore through the chamber. Hannah grabbed Mark's shoulder, and Jordan wrapped both arms around Alyssa's waist. Together, they formed a human chain, anchoring her just inches from the darkness. But whatever had her wasn't letting go. A growl rolled through the air, not loud, but deep. Like the chamber itself had spoken. Alyssa's flashlight flared once, and for the briefest instant, they saw it. Not a face. Not even a shape. Just holes. In the air. In the space around her. Blacker than anything else. And eyes. Dozens. Some blinking. Some staring wide. All facing her. It wasn't dragging her with limbs. It was pulling her with hunger. Let go, she screamed, kicking wildly. Let go. Hannah gritted her teeth, digging her boots into the floor. We're not letting it take you. Then Mark did the only thing he could think of. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the journal. He opened to the middle page, the one with the burnt words, the one that said it doesn't sleep, and tore it out. Take it, he shouted, holding the page toward the dark. You want memory. You want witnesses. Take this. The page caught fire in his hand. No spark. No flame source. It just burned, as if lit from within. Alyssa's body dropped hard to the stone. The shadows recoiled. Not in pain, in recognition. It had seen that page before. Mark let the burning journal fall to the floor. The light inside the page grew brighter, and for a split second, the entire chamber exploded with light. And they saw everything. Not a figure. Not a monster. A hole in the world. A tear. A wound. As if reality had been scraped away by claws larger than time. And beneath it, faces. Hundreds. People with eyes wide open. Screaming silently. Not dead. Not gone. Just trapped. And one of those faces, in the far corner of the light, looked just like Mark. Then the light vanished. The chamber was empty again. The door was shut. The chains were gone. The journal was ash. And none of them moved. No one spoke. Not immediately. Their eyes burned from the flash, their bodies still rigid with the tension of something ancient brushing too close. Alyssa lay trembling on the cold stone, gasping in shallow bursts of breath, her fingers still curled as if they were being pulled, still waiting for something to take her again. The chamber stank of ash and heat, yet there was no fire. No embers. No smoke. Only the blackened scraps of the journal, curling on the floor in complete silence. Mark was still staring at the space where his own face had appeared, inside the thing. Inside that hole. He'd seen it. Clear as anything. His eyes. His expression. mouth open in an eternal scream. But it wasn't just a reflection. It hadn't moved when he did. It hadn't mimicked him. It had been watching. And it knew he'd recognized it. I saw, Mark began, but the words caught in his throat. I saw me, he finished softly. Jordan didn't respond. He was helping Alyssa sit upright, his face pale, his hands visibly shaking. Hannah stood near the wall, one hand pressed flat against the stone, as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. I think we've been here before, she whispered. Alyssa looked up. What? I think we've all been here before. No. I'd remember, Mark started. Would you? Hannah cut in, her voice suddenly sharp. Would you really remember if this place didn't want you to? If it just pulled you in again, and again, like it's doing now? Silence. Only the distant echo of water dripping somewhere. A rhythmic tap. 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 Like a leaky faucet in a forgotten home. None of this feels real, Jordan muttered. I can't tell if it's night or day anymore. I haven't eaten. I haven't been hungry. How long have we even been down here? They all looked at Mark. He checked his watch. The screen was blank. Dead. It was working 10 minutes ago, he whispered. I swear to God, it was. Time doesn't work down here, Hannah said. It bends. Jordan stood, the light from his flashlight flickering back on, sputtering, but still functioning. It passed over the walls again, showing the same endless scratches, carvings, and eye-like symbols. But now, there were more. Fresh ones. Where once the stone was faded and chipped, now the symbols looked freshly carved. Dust still clung to the edges. And worse still. Names. Names none of them remembered writing. Mark Julian. Alyssa Green. Jordan R. Hannah Dale. Etched into the wall in different handwriting. Deep grooves. Some of the letters jagged, uneven, as if carved in panic. Okay, Jordan said, stepping back. That was not there before. I didn't carve that. No one did, Mark said. It did. Why? Alyssa asked. Why our names? Because it doesn't want us to leave. They didn't wait for more signs. There was still a door at the far end of the chamber, much smaller than the one the creature had come from. Iron bars crossed it in a rusted X, but no lock. Hannah shoved them aside, and the hinges groaned open into another passage. This one was different. Narrow. Cramped. And vertical. A stairwell spiraled down into the dark, stone steps slick with condensation. The air was colder now, and it smelled of wet roots and something else, old fabric. Dust? Mark's flashlight flickered across the stairwell wall, revealing something unexpected. Wallpaper. Peeling strips of once green floral paper clung to the wall in places, water-damaged and faded. Under it, wooden paneling. Moldy. Splintering. It wasn't a tunnel anymore. It was a house. Hannah leaned close and touched one of the walls. What is this? Feels like a basement, Jordan said. But we were just in a cave, Alyssa said. How does this even connect? We're not in a real place, Mark muttered. We're in something's memory of one. They descended the stairs slowly. Each step groaned, some bending beneath their weight. Cobwebs brushed their shoulders. Faint noises creaked from deep within the walls, footsteps that weren't theirs. Doors that shut on their own, softly, in distant parts of the house they hadn't seen yet. At the bottom of the stairwell was a narrow hallway. And at the end of it, a room. The door was ajar. Light spilled out from it, not flashlight light, but something warm and golden, like a lantern glow. Mark approached it first, pushing the door open gently with his foot. Inside was a living room. Or at least something trying to look like one. A fireplace. A couch. A rug with faded reds and browns. An old rotary phone sat on a wooden side table. The room was still. Perfect. Like someone had cleaned it up just moments before they entered. A fire flickered in the hearth, even though no one had lit it. And sitting on the couch was a woman. Middle-aged. Pale. Hair tied back in a gray bun. Her clothes were wrong, old-fashioned. Like something out of the 1950s. Her hands rested gently in her lap. Her eyes were closed. Alyssa reached for Hannah. Is she real? Jordan stepped forward. Ma'am. Hey, are you okay? The woman opened her eyes. They were completely white. No irises. No pupils. And yet, she smiled. Like she'd been expecting them. Like they were guests arriving late to a party that had never ended. Would you like some tea? She asked, voice brittle but pleasant. It's almost steeped. Jordan froze. What? The woman stood slowly. Moved toward the fireplace. Picked up a silver kettle from a hook and turned toward the empty table near the wall. She set down 4 teacups. One for each of them. Then she turned around again. Her face was still smiling, but her eyes were bleeding. Thin trickles of black ran from the corners like ink from a broken pen. It always ends here, she said softly. They didn't move. She pointed to the couch. Sit. It's rude to stand. No one sat. The fire flared behind her. And the room shifted. Not all at once, in slow, rippling motions. The walls grew darker. The paper peeled faster. The couch began to mold and curl inward like it had aged a decade in seconds. The woman's smile widened, but her skin cracked as it did, her cheek splitting open slightly. Mark whispered, "We have to go." The woman's head twitched toward him. You already did. Then she shattered. Not exploded, shattered. Like glass under a hammer. Her body fractured into 1,000 tiny shards that floated midair for a moment, then evaporated into smoke. And the living room, the whole room, collapsed. The fire died. The furniture dissolved. And they were back in the tunnel. No doors. No stairs. No house. Just walls. Dirt. And silence. As if none of it had happened. But when Mark looked down at his shirt, there was tea. Hot. Fresh. Spilled across his chest. Mark stared at the stain on his chest. His breath came in short, unsteady bursts. The tea had soaked through his shirt, still warm, the faint scent of chamomile and something sour clinging to the fabric. The others stood in silence, their flashlights barely flickering against the walls that now surrounded them again. The tunnel had returned, but not the same as before. It was narrower. And breathing. The walls subtly pulsed, as if the earth itself inhaled and exhaled, a deep rhythm like a sleeping animal that was never really asleep. The wood paneling, the stairs, the fireplace, they were all gone. But something had changed. Something in them. No one spoke about the woman. Or the way her skin cracked like porcelain. Or the way her voice had seemed to echo not through the air, but directly inside their skulls. She had spoken with memory, not voice. Like she already knew how their story would end. They walked forward. Deeper. The light behind them died. When they turned, the path they had just taken was gone again, just a flat, moist wall of black dirt. Again, it was steering them. They moved in silence for minutes. Maybe hours. The tunnel began to widen again, but not like before. This time, it was rough. Chaotic. Like it had been carved by something burrowing, not building. Scrape marks raked the walls. Black fluid, tar or something worse, oozed from deep cracks in the rock. Look, Alyssa whispered. She pointed ahead. The tunnel split again, but this time, not in 3 directions. Just one. And at the mouth of the new tunnel, a mirror. An old, full-length standing mirror with an ornate wooden frame, cracked in one corner, covered in dirt and cobwebs. It stood upright on the stone path, alone, facing them. There was no reflection. Not at first. Then, slowly, shapes appeared. Their shadows, moving inside the mirror, not matching their motions, but acting on their own. Jordan raised his hand. His reflection stared back, unmoving. Mark stepped closer. Inside the mirror, his reflection smiled. But Mark hadn't. And then it waved. A slow, taunting wave with fingers too long, joints bending wrong, the mouth stretching wider than humanly possible. Its lips moved, but no sound came. Still, he knew what it was saying. You're already here. Mark stepped back instinctively, bumping into Hannah. That's not me, he whispered. It's not a reflection. It's watching us, Alyssa said. It is us, Jordan added, eyes locked on his own twisted doppelganger. Then their reflections began to walk. Toward them. From inside the glass. They didn't move in unison. They didn't mimic. They acted, stepping forward, one at a time. The version of Hannah blinked wrong, delayed, as if remembering to be human. Alyssa's reflection tilted its head, eyes wide, like a puppet waiting for strings. Jordan's was smiling in a way he hadn't smiled since childhood, wide, toothy, hungry. And Mark's. His reflection looked sad. But then it turned its head slowly, and behind it, just beyond the boundary of the mirror, the figure was there. Tall. Shifting. Watching. Mark stepped forward again. He didn't want to. His body moved without permission. Like something behind the glass had him by the spine. We should go around it, Hannah said. But there was no way around. The tunnel was too narrow. The mirror filled the space completely. Smash it, Alyssa whispered. But Mark shook his head. What if that's worse? They hesitated. The reflections did not. They stood inches from the glass now, their hands pressed against the inside surface, drumming their fingers softly. A rhythm. 3 taps. Then silence. 3 taps. Then. The glass rippled. Not cracked. Not broke. It rippled, like water. Their reflections warped, distorting. Their mouths opened wide, too wide, and a voice, not loud, not even audible, pushed into their heads. Come back. Hannah yanked Mark's arm, pulling him backward. Don't look at it. But he couldn't help it. The mirror was changing again. The reflection of the tunnel behind them was gone now. In its place, a new image bloomed. A clearing. The forest. Lit by early morning sun. Birds. Grass. Normalcy. Their tents. Their bags. Everything they had left behind. It showed them the way out. I think it's a portal, Jordan said, stepping forward. It's letting us go. No, Hannah said firmly. It's showing us what we want. But what if it's real? Alyssa asked. Behind them, the tunnel shuddered. A deep thud pulsed through the earth. Footsteps. Slow. Coming closer. The air shifted again. Cold. Oily. Heavy. They had to make a choice. Mark stepped toward the mirror. If this is the way out. Then his reflection stepped through. No warning. No sound. It just passed through the surface of the glass like fog, and grabbed him. Fast. Hard. It tried to pull him back through. Mark screamed. His feet lifted off the ground as the others rushed forward, grabbing at him, pulling. But the reflection held on with impossible strength. And behind it, inside the glass, the forest image flickered. Replaced with something burning. The forest. Their tents. All on fire. People running. Smoke rising. And in the center of the flames, a figure made of ash and bone. Watching. Still watching. I see it, Mark choked. It's inside the mirror. And then, just like that, the reflection let go. Mark fell back hard, gasping. The mirror's surface solidified again, rippling once, then going completely black. Their reflections were gone. And carved across the glass, deep and fresh, was a single phrase. You were never out. They moved forward. There was no other choice. The tunnel narrowed again. The darkness returned, thicker now, more present. It pressed against their skin, as if trying to slow them, trap them, erase the parts of them that remembered who they were. Then, finally, it opened again. A cavern. Massive. At the center, a lake of still, black water. Too smooth. Too silent. And in the center of the lake, a house. Not a building. Not a ruin. A replica of one of their childhood homes. But whose? Hannah stepped closer to the water's edge. And without turning, she whispered, "It's mine." The cavern breathed around them like a living thing. The walls pulsed with unseen currents, as if the rock itself throbbed in time with their racing hearts. Shadows flickered from a source they couldn't see, long fingers stretching and retreating like smoke caught in a draft. It was so quiet here that every breath felt loud, every step resonated like a hammer strike. At the cavern's center lay a lake so black it seemed to absorb all the light. The surface was impossibly smooth, like a sheet of glass forged from shadow. No ripples disturbed its stillness. It was a pool of nothingness that promised to swallow them whole. And standing there, impossibly perfect and utterly wrong, was the house. A small wooden structure, its weathered siding coated in peeling paint that shimmered faintly in the dim glow of the cavern. It looked almost welcoming at first glance, windows framed with lace curtains, a front porch with a rusted swing, and a chimney that puffed slow, silent smoke into the shadowed air. But the air around it was thick, suffused with a dread that sank into their bones like a cold claw. Hannah's voice broke the heavy silence. "It's mine," she whispered, the single word barely audible. Her eyes glistened with something between fear and nostalgia, a pain too deep for tears. They all moved toward the lake's edge, the stone path ending abruptly at dark water. No bridge. No stepping stones. Nothing to cross except the impenetrable blackness. Jordan crouched and touched the surface of the water with trembling fingers. The liquid was cold, unnaturally so, colder than anything he had ever felt. The water did not ripple from his touch, but a shadow moved beneath. Hannah swallowed hard. "It's not water." "What is it then?" Alyssa asked. "No idea," Mark said, his voice strained. "But I don't think it's safe." The cavern's dim light reflected off the lake, casting the house's warped image onto the walls. The distorted figure twisted and shimmered, reminding them of the mirror and the tunnel, things meant to deceive and trap. Jordan looked back at the narrow tunnel they had come from. "We don't have a choice. We have to cross." "But how?" Alyssa whispered. The four of them exchanged nervous glances. The house might hold answers. Or it might hold the end of everything. Hannah stepped forward and knelt at the edge. "When I was a kid, I used to imagine a bridge here. A path over the water. Maybe if I believe it, it will appear." Mark frowned. "That's not how this works. We can't just wish our way out." Hannah reached out again, this time pressing both hands flat on the surface. A shiver rippled through the lake, so faint it might have been imagined. But then, a slender wooden plank emerged from the darkness, curling and weaving like a snake, its surface slick and glossy. It's a bridge, Jordan said, eyes wide. Hannah slowly rose, carefully stepping onto the plank. It held her weight. One by one, they crossed the lake, the plank curling beneath their feet like a living thing, always keeping just enough distance from the black water. Halfway across, the cavern seemed to close in. The walls pulsed faster, and the air thickened until it felt like breathing through wet wool. The reflections in the lake turned from shimmering images to horrifying scenes, twisted versions of their memories flickering beneath the surface. Mark saw a burned-down version of his childhood home, flames licking the roof while faceless shadows watched. Alyssa glimpsed a twisted carnival, where laughter echoed with screams beneath the tents. Jordan saw a forest, alive and hungry, swallowing everything whole. Hannah saw herself standing alone in the rain, staring at a broken mirror. The plank trembled. "Keep moving," Hannah urged. When they reached the shore on the other side, the house stood silent, its front door slightly ajar. The smoke from the chimney no longer rose, and the cold pressed against their skin like icy fingers. Mark reached for the door and pushed it open slowly. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp wood and something metallic. The floorboards creaked beneath their feet, and the faint glow of candlelight flickered from the far corner. The room was a perfect replica of a living room, old photographs lined the walls, a rocking chair moved gently despite the still air, and a cracked porcelain doll sat on a dusty table. Hannah's gaze fell upon a mirror hanging over the fireplace. Her reflection stared back, but it was wrong. The eyes were hollow, black pits leaking shadows that writhed like snakes. She reached out to touch it, but her hand passed through the glass as if it weren't there. A chilling voice whispered from nowhere and everywhere. "Welcome home, Hannah." The door slammed shut behind them. They were trapped. The house wasn't just a place. It was a prison. And it had been waiting. The door slammed shut with a force that rattled the very bones of the house. The echo hung in the stale air long after the sound died away. Four pairs of eyes darted toward the barrier, pressing their hands against the cold wood, but the door did not budge. It was as though the house itself had sealed them inside, turning from a fragile structure into an impenetrable tomb. A thick silence followed, no wind, no creaking, no sounds of life beyond their own breathing. Hannah swallowed hard, her heart hammering in her chest. "We're trapped," she said quietly. "There's no way out." "We have to find something," Mark said, voice steadier than he felt. "Something here that can help us." They spread out slowly, the flickering candlelight casting long, sinister shadows that stretched and twisted like living things. The house was eerily quiet, but it felt alive. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing faintly, expanding and contracting with a slow rhythm that matched the pounding of their hearts. The photographs on the walls drew Hannah's attention. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. They were family portraits, but distorted. Faces blurred, eyes blacked out, smiles twisted into unnatural grins. Some showed people she didn't recognize, others looked uncannily familiar. Mark noticed a calendar pinned to the wall near a faded painting of the forest. The year was 1962. "Look at this," he called, gesturing to the calendar. The days were scratched out in frantic strokes, except for the last week, which was left untouched, as if time had stopped there. Alyssa shivered. "It's like whoever lived here was waiting, for what, I don't know." Jordan ran his hand along a dusty mantelpiece. A thick layer of grime covered everything, but he found a small brass key resting on a cracked porcelain saucer. "Maybe this will open the door," he said, holding it up. Hannah took it carefully and tried it in the lock. The mechanism clicked softly, but the door remained immovable. "It's not meant to open," she said. "Not yet." Mark crouched near the fireplace, noticing something odd about the hearth. The bricks were arranged oddly, with some protruding slightly, forming a rough pattern. "Here," he said, pressing one of the bricks. A low rumble vibrated through the floorboards, and the fireplace slowly slid aside like a secret door, revealing a narrow stairwell leading downward. They exchanged wary glances. "This way," Hannah said. The stairs creaked beneath their weight, spiraling deep into darkness. The air grew colder, damp, and heavy with the scent of earth and decay. A soft drip echoed somewhere far below, distant but steady. At the bottom, they entered a subterranean chamber. The walls were lined with shelves filled with dusty, leather-bound books and jars containing faded, unidentifiable specimens. The flickering light came from oil lamps placed haphazardly on tables and shelves. Jordan picked up a book, its title embossed in gold lettering, Whispers of the Deep. Flipping it open, he read aloud passages describing rituals, shadows that lived between worlds, and entities that fed on memory and fear. Alyssa felt a chill run down her spine as her eyes scanned the page. This is what's been trapping us, isn't it? This house, this place, it feeds on our memories. Hannah nodded. It's like a parasite. It traps us in the past, our own regrets, fears, and memories. It's how it holds on to us. Suddenly, the lamps flickered violently, plunging the room into near darkness. A voice whispered from the shadows. Soft. Like a breeze brushing over dead leaves. Why do you run from what you have forgotten? The voice was everywhere and nowhere. They spun, flashlights piercing the blackness. A figure stood in the corner, a woman, her face pale and blurred, as if seen through a veil of water. Her eyes were empty sockets, but they seemed to pierce through their souls. Who are you? Mark asked, voice shaking. The figure smiled, revealing sharp, glinting teeth. I am the keeper of memories lost. The guardian of those who wander too far from what they once were. Hannah stepped forward. What do you want? To remember, the figure whispered. To feed. To bind. To trap. She stretched out a hand, and the shadows twisted and writhed, creeping along the floor toward them like living smoke. Jordan shouted, "Run!" They bolted back up the stairs as the shadows lunged, clawing at their legs and arms, whispering forgotten names, lost moments, and fears they'd buried deep. The stairwell shook, dust falling from the ceiling. Bursting into the living room again, they slammed the secret door shut behind them. Panting, they leaned against the wall, trying to calm their racing hearts. We can't stay here, Alyssa gasped. Whatever that thing is, it's feeding on us. Mark looked at Hannah. There has to be a way out. She nodded slowly. The house, it breathes with us. It's connected to our memories. If we can face what it's holding, maybe we can break free. Jordan shivered. How do you face something you can't see? Before Hannah could answer, the porcelain doll on the table began to move. Its cracked head turned slowly to face them, and its glass eyes glowed red. It whispered. Remember. The house was alive. And it was hungry. The doll's cracked porcelain face was frozen in a delicate smile, too sweet, too eerie. Its glass eyes, glowing faintly red, seemed to pierce the room, locking onto each of them as if feeding on their very souls. The house groaned again, its ancient bones creaking and shifting as if responding to the doll's silent command. Alyssa instinctively stepped back, but the doll remained still, only its eyes glowing brighter in the dim candlelight. Mark swallowed hard. What do you want from us? The doll's tiny lips moved, whispering words that sounded like the faint rustling of dead leaves. Remember. Suddenly, the walls around them began to change. The photographs on the walls morphed. Faces twisted, eyes widening unnaturally. Some began to move, waving, smiling, crying, all caught in a grotesque dance of light and shadow. The air thickened with the scent of old paper and dust, and whispers began to fill the room, weaving around them like a suffocating fog. Jordan gripped Hannah's arm. It's showing us memories, our memories. The ones we tried to forget. Hannah nodded, her eyes wide. The house feeds on what we bury deep. Our regrets, our fears, the moments we lock away. Alyssa's breath hitched. Is that why it trapped us here? To feed on our pain? Mark clenched his fists. Then we have to face it. We have to confront what it's holding. The doll's eyes flashed once, and the room around them dissolved. Suddenly, they were standing in a misty forest, familiar yet warped. The trees were taller, their branches twisted into unnatural shapes that seemed to whisper in a language just beyond understanding. The sky was a muted gray, the sun a dull, distant glow that barely penetrated the fog. Before them stood figures, shadows from their past. Hannah saw a younger version of herself, standing alone by a lake, staring at her reflection and crying. The doll's whisper echoed in her ears. Remember. Tears welled in her eyes as the memory played out, the day she had lost her brother, the guilt that had haunted her ever since. Jordan faced a campfire where his father sat silently, smoke curling from a pipe. His father's eyes were empty, lifeless. Jordan remembered the night his father disappeared, leaving behind silence and unanswered questions. Alyssa found herself before a carnival tent, laughter echoing as a shadowy figure reached out for her. It was the night she had run away, leaving her best friend behind. Mark's vision was the darkest. He stood at the edge of a burning house, flames licking the sky, consuming everything. Inside, a figure screamed, a woman's voice calling his name. The fire was his fault. The doll's voice grew louder. Face it. The forest around them pulsed with shadows reaching out, pulling at their clothes, their skin, their memories. Each step forward was met with resistance, a physical weight pressing on their chests, suffocating. They had no choice but to move forward, toward the center of the forest. There, at the heart of the mist, was a mirror, framed in twisted vines and thorns. The surface shimmered like water, reflecting not the forest, but their deepest fears. Hannah's reflection stared back, her face split by a wide, cruel smile. "You're to blame," it whispered. Jordan's reflection was engulfed in flames, the fire reflecting his own guilt and anger. Alyssa's was trapped behind bars, reaching out for a friend she could no longer save. Mark's reflection was consumed by darkness, whispering words of regret and failure. The doll's eyes glowed brighter as it spoke. "To escape, you must embrace your memories. Accept them. Or be consumed." One by one, they stepped toward the mirror, facing the twisted versions of themselves. Hannah reached out first. Her reflection lunged, but instead of retreating, Hannah held her ground. Tears streamed as she whispered, "I'm sorry." The reflection softened, the cruel smile fading. The mirror shimmered, and the forest began to brighten. Jordan followed, shouting through clenched teeth, "I won't run anymore." Alyssa cried out, "I'm coming back for you. I promise." Mark stared into the darkness, then whispered, "I forgive myself." The forest dissolved. They were back in the house's living room, the doll now motionless, its eyes dim. The door creaked open. Fresh air rushed in, cool and clean. They were free. But the house wasn't finished. A final whisper echoed through the room. "Until next time." The door creaked open, releasing a rush of cold, clean air that swept through the stale confines of the house's living room. They blinked against the sudden brightness, pale, gray light filtering in through the grimy windows, dust motes dancing like restless spirits in the air. They should have felt relief. Freedom. The promise of escape after what they had endured. But none of them did. Instead, an unbearable weight pressed against their chests, a quiet dread that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. The house had let them leave. But it had also marked them. Mark was the first to break the silence. "We made it out," he said, voice hollow. "We're free. Are we?" Alyssa's gaze darted nervously toward the doorway. "I don't feel free." Hannah shivered. That whisper. "Until next time. What if this isn't over?" Jordan pulled his jacket tighter around himself. "Maybe this house isn't just a place. Maybe it's a curse. A shadow that follows." A chill wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles. Darkness swallowed the space, but faint glowing eyes appeared, flickering in every corner like embers, watching. Waiting. They didn't need to be told twice. They moved quickly toward the front door. Outside, the air was cold but real. The forest stretched before them, the trees tall and dark, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. But as they stepped into the clearing, the fog rolled back in thicker than ever, swirling and curling around their ankles like living smoke. Alyssa glanced back at the house. It was no longer there. Only a gaping black pit remained where it had stood. Gone, she whispered. But where did it go? No matter, Mark said. We're out. But the forest wasn't welcoming. The trees whispered in voices low and unintelligible, shadows danced just beyond the reach of their flashlights, and the fog curled tighter. Hannah stopped suddenly. Look. Ahead, on the forest floor, their footprints glowed faintly, a pale blue light that pulsed with every step. Why are our footprints glowing? Jordan asked, unease creeping into his voice. Mark bent down, fingers brushing the soft earth. The glowing footprints seemed to burn with a cold fire. This forest remembers, Mark said grimly. It's like the house left a part of itself inside us. Night fell fast. Their flashlights flickered as the fog thickened into a wall of silence. They set up camp beneath towering pines, the fire crackling weakly in the damp air. But sleep did not come. Each of them felt watched. The air around them seemed to hum with a low vibration, a pulse in time with their racing hearts. Hours later, Mark awoke to the sound of soft footsteps circling the campfire. He sat up, shining his flashlight toward the sound. No one was there. But the firelight flickered violently. From the darkness emerged a figure, shifting, indistinct, a shadow that flickered between shapes. It hovered just beyond the fire's glow, its eyes two piercing points of light. Mark froze. The figure spoke without moving its lips. You carry the house with you. The words echoed inside his mind. You are marked. Suddenly, the campfire sputtered and went out. Darkness enveloped them. Alyssa screamed. Hannah grabbed her hand. Jordan shone his light around, but the shadows seemed to swallow the beams. The figure moved closer, its form coalescing into a grotesque shape, a twisted amalgam of the faces from the photographs in the house. Mark shouted, "Run!" They scrambled through the forest, branches tearing at their clothes, roots threatening to trip them. Behind them, the laughter of the doll echoed, soft, sinister, never-ending. After what felt like hours, they burst out of the forest edge, stumbling onto a narrow road. The fog lifted. The stars shone cold and distant. But they were not alone. At the roadside stood an old sign, half buried in vines. Welcome to Pine Hollow Campground. The place they had left behind. They looked at each other, breathless and broken. Mark whispered, it never ended. And beneath the stars, shadows gathered. Watching. Waiting. The house was not just a place. It was a curse. And it had followed them home. The road stretched endlessly before them, a ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through the dense, ancient woods that surrounded Pine Hollow Campground. The fog had lifted, but the chill remained, crawling beneath their skin like a slow poison. Their breaths came out in shallow, visible puffs, despite the season. No one spoke. Each step forward felt heavier than the last, weighted by the invisible chains the house had left behind. Days passed, or maybe weeks. Time had lost all meaning since they had escaped the house. The forest had swallowed their memories of exact hours and dates. They found themselves back in the world they had left, but the world had changed. Or maybe it was them. They tried to act normal, to resume their lives. But the curse was no longer bound to the forest, it had tethered itself to their souls, following them like a shadow with its own will. Mark woke one morning to find a message smeared on his bedroom wall, written in what looked like ash and dirt. You belong to the house now. His hands trembled as he stared at the words. He wasn't alone. Alyssa's phone buzzed incessantly with strange calls, empty lines filled with whispered voices repeating her name. Jordan started seeing reflections of the house everywhere, in windows, mirrors, even the darkened screen of his computer. Hannah's nightmares were relentless, each dream a vivid replay of the house's rooms, with the porcelain doll watching silently in the corner. One by one, they tried to break free. Mark visited a psychic, desperate for answers. The woman's eyes widened as she examined him. "There's a dark tether," she said. "It clings to your soul. It feeds on your memories, your pain. It's not just a house, it's a gateway." Alyssa turned to therapy, hoping to heal the trauma, but the shadow of the house invaded her sessions, her therapist's voice sometimes warping into that sinister whisper from the doll. Jordan sought solace in the woods, but the forest twisted around him, the trees murmuring his name in a language only he could hear. Hannah isolated herself, poring over old journals and family records, uncovering secrets buried deep, secrets that tied her family to Pine Hollow in ways she never imagined. One night, as the moon hung low and heavy, they gathered again. This time in Mark's apartment, a safe place, or so they thought. The air was thick with tension and unspoken fear. "We can't run," Hannah said, voice steady but haunted. "The house is inside us now." Mark nodded. "We have to fight it. Find the source. Destroy it." "But how?" Alyssa asked, tears glistening. "It's everywhere. In our memories, our reflections." Jordan held up a crumpled piece of paper he had found hidden in an old book. Symbols. Rituals. A way to sever the tether. They prepared. Candles lit, salt lines drawn, ancient words spoken softly but with conviction. The house's curse was not just a place, it was a presence, a dark thread woven through the fabric of their lives. They called it. They challenged it. And it answered. The lights flickered. Shadows lengthened. The air grew cold. From the corner of the room, the porcelain doll appeared, sitting on the windowsill, eyes glowing red. The house was watching. It was waiting. And it was angry. The battle for their souls had begun. The room felt like it was closing in. The faint flicker of candlelight barely pushed back the encroaching shadows that curled like living tendrils around the edges of the walls. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, an odor that seemed to seep from the very walls of Mark's apartment, as though the house itself had reached through the forest and rooted itself in their lives. Mark, Hannah, Alyssa, and Jordan sat in a tight circle on the cold floor, salt circles glowing faintly beneath their knees. The ritual book lay open between them, its pages yellowed and fragile, ink faded but the words etched deep with ancient power. Each word they spoke felt like a challenge hurled into the darkness. The house was no longer a place they could escape. It had become a predator that stalked their minds, their memories, their very souls. Mark's voice cracked as he read aloud. "By fire and earth, by water and air, we call upon the guardians who care. From shadow and mist, from night and fear, we bind this darkness, hold it here." The words echoed into the room, stirring the stale air. But with every incantation, the shadows shifted, growing deeper, more aggressive. The room's temperature plunged, their breaths visible in quick, desperate puffs. Suddenly, a low rumble began beneath them, vibrating through the floorboards, rising like a subterranean growl from the earth itself. The porcelain doll on the windowsill twitched, its red eyes flaring bright. Jordan's flashlight flickered and died. Alyssa's whispered, "It's here. It's coming." From the corners, shadows surged forward, twisting, claw-like shapes reaching with impossible speed, scraping the walls and the floor. The salt circles flickered and cracked. Hannah screamed as the darkness reached for her, fingers of cold smoke wrapping around her wrists like iron chains. Mark grabbed her hand, pulling with all his strength. "We have to stay together," he shouted, voice fierce despite the shaking. But the shadows were relentless. They crawled under the door cracks, pooled like ink across the floor, and whispered terrible secrets, voices of lost souls, pain, regret, and fear. Mark's mind was flooded with memories he had tried to forget, the fire consuming his childhood home, his mother's screams, the helplessness, the guilt. Alyssa was haunted by the laughter of a friend she left behind, frozen in a carnival tent filled with shadows. Jordan's memories twisted, showing him his father's empty chair, the silence where love had once been. Hannah's visions burned with loss, her brother's disappearance, the years of solitude and silence that followed. The doll's voice rose, a terrible chorus echoing from every corner. You cannot run. You cannot hide. The house is inside. With a sudden surge, the shadows enveloped them, a cold so deep it threatened to freeze their souls. Mark clenched his fists, fighting the paralysis creeping through his limbs. Then, through the chaos, a light pierced the darkness. It was faint at first, a soft, warm glow emanating from the center of their circle. Hannah's voice rose above the whispers. We have each other. Together, we're stronger. One by one, they focused on that light, memories of happier times, laughter around campfires, the feel of warm sun on their faces. The shadows recoiled. But the battle was far from over. The house was patient. It would wait. It would watch. And when they least expected it, it would return, darker, hungrier, and more relentless. The candles sputtered, their flames fighting a losing battle against the darkness that clawed its way through the corners of Mark's apartment. The air hung heavy with the lingering cold, each breath like frost scraping the inside of their lungs. Outside, the night pressed in through the windows, a black tide that threatened to overwhelm their fragile sanctuary. But inside, something had changed. They had survived. Or at least, that was what they told themselves. The light they summoned in the last moment hadn't driven the darkness away completely. It had only pushed it back, like a tide retreating before the inevitable return of the waves. The four friends sat huddled, the open ritual book still between them. The symbols on the pages seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering candlelight, as if the book itself was alive, feeding on their fear. Hannah's voice was barely a whisper. The house, it's not just a place. It's a fracture, a wound in reality. Mark nodded slowly. That mirror in the tunnel, the lake, the forest, they're all parts of the same tear. And it's bleeding into our world. Jordan clenched his jaw. So this curse, this thing we're fighting, it's not just hunting us. It's trying to erase us. Alyssa shivered. But how? How do you fight something like that? The following days became a blur of uneasy sleep and restless wakefulness. The curse's influence crept deeper into their lives, warping the world around them. Mark's reflection in the mirror wavered, sometimes flickering like a broken video feed. At night, he would see it smiling back with a sinister grin he didn't recognize. Alyssa found messages scrawled in fog on her bathroom mirror, pleas and warnings in a handwriting that wasn't hers. Jordan's dreams were invaded by shadowy figures whispering secrets of the forest, secrets that gnawed at his sanity. Hannah's journals filled themselves overnight, pages writing in a language she could barely comprehend, symbols that pulsed with dark power. They realized they needed help. Desperate, they reached out to a folklore expert, Dr. Miriam Walsh, a woman who had spent her life studying haunted places and ancient curses. Meeting her was like stepping into another world, a cluttered office filled with dusty tomes, dried herbs, and strange artifacts that hummed with power. Dr. Walsh listened carefully as they recounted their story, her eyes never leaving theirs. This house, she said slowly, is what we call a memory haunt. It traps the souls of those who are bound to it by guilt, fear, and loss. It's a place where the veil between worlds is thin, a wound in reality, as you said. She paced, pulling out an ancient map marked with symbols that matched the book they had found. The only way to sever the curse, she continued, is to perform a binding ritual at the site of the original wound, the lost campground itself. You must confront the heart of the darkness and offer what it desires most, release. The journey back to Pine Hollow was fraught with tension. The forest seemed to resist them, branches scratching like claws, shadows slipping just beyond their vision. When they arrived, the campground was unrecognizable, overgrown, twisted, and eerily silent. At the center stood a gnarled tree, its bark blackened and cracked, roots twisting deep into the earth like veins. Dr. Walsh approached it cautiously, chanting in a language older than time. The ground trembled. The air pulsed with power. From the shadows emerged the figure from the house, the porcelain doll, now towering and monstrous, its eyes blazing with crimson fire. It spoke with a voice like breaking glass. "Why do you return?" Mark stepped forward, voice steady. "To end this." The ritual began. Candles flickered, words were spoken, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. The doll's form twisted and writhed, shadows bursting from its eyes like wildfire. But the four friends stood firm, their hands joined, hearts united. The curse screamed, a sound that shattered the night and echoed through the trees. Then, silence. The doll collapsed into a pile of shattered porcelain. The tree's bark peeled away, revealing glowing roots pulsing with soft light. The campground began to heal, the forest breathing easier. Exhausted but victorious, they watched as dawn broke over the trees, light spilling across the world like a promise. They were free. But scars remained. The dawn crept slowly through the tall pines, pale fingers of light stretching over the damp earth of Pine Hollow campground. The air was cool but no longer oppressive, the suffocating fog had lifted, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the forest seemed to breathe freely. The gnarled tree at the center, once blackened and twisted, now pulsed with a soft, golden glow as if life had returned to its roots. Mark, Hannah, Alyssa, Jordan, and Dr. Miriam Walsh stood in a circle around the tree. The ritual had ended. The curse was broken. The heavy weight that had clung to them like a second skin was lifted, at least for now. But none of them felt relief. Instead, a hollow ache settled in their chests. The memories that had once been shadows creeping in their minds now shouted in the silence, echoing through their souls. Weeks passed since the ritual, and the friends returned to their everyday lives. But the world had changed. Mark woke every night, his dreams invaded by flickering images, the burning house, the whispering shadows, the porcelain doll's glowing eyes. He'd lie awake, heart pounding, unable to escape the relentless echo of the curse. Alyssa found herself staring into mirrors, searching for the cracks, the distorted reflection that had haunted her in Pine Hollow. She saw nothing, but sometimes, in the corner of her eye, a shadow flickered, vanishing when she turned to look. Jordan became obsessed with the forest, spending long hours wandering its edges, chasing whispers only he could hear. He felt pulled to the trees, as if the curse had planted a seed deep inside him, growing roots tangled in his mind. Hannah buried herself in old journals and family records, desperate to uncover the origin of the house, the curse, and why her family had been entwined with it for generations. One evening, the five gathered once again, this time at Mark's apartment, now transformed from a sanctuary into a war room of maps, symbols, and old texts. Dr. Walsh spread out an ancient manuscript, its pages brittle but its writing clear. "This," she said, "is the Codex of the Hollow. It speaks of a guardian, an entity bound to the land and the memories of those who suffer. The house was its prison and its weapon." Mark frowned. So, destroying the house wasn't enough? "No," Miriam said softly. "The curse's wound runs deeper. The guardian still lingers, waiting, watching. You freed yourselves, but the land remembers." Alyssa swallowed hard. "What happens now?" "We prepare," Miriam said grimly. "Because the curse will come again. And next time, it may not be so forgiving." That night, as the group dispersed, Mark lingered by his window. The city's distant lights twinkled, but his gaze was drawn beyond, to the dark line of trees on the horizon. A soft wind stirred, carrying a whisper just beyond hearing. Until next time. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. Objects moved on their own, keys disappearing only to be found in odd places, shadows flickering where no light should be. Phones rang with static, and sometimes faint laughter drifted through empty rooms. Mark noticed a figure standing across the street, a silhouette against the street lamp's glow, watching, waiting. When he blinked, it was gone. Alyssa's dreams turned darker, filled with visions of a house rebuilt from smoke and ash, doors opening to endless darkness. Jordan's forest walks became journeys into nightmare landscapes, twisted trees and broken mirrors reflecting his deepest fears. Hannah's journals filled overnight, new pages appearing with cryptic messages. The guardian is patient. The land remembers. The wound is not healed. The friends realized their fight was far from over. They needed to confront the guardian itself, an entity older than the trees, bound to the pain and memories of all who had suffered. Their next journey would take them beyond the physical world into a place where reality thinned, the hollow, a realm of shadow and memory. As night fell, Mark packed his bag with the few things he'd need. He glanced at the cracked mirror on his wall, his reflection steady but his eyes haunted. Outside, the wind whispered again. And the forest waited. The air grew heavier as the four friends and Dr. Miriam Walsh approached the edge of the forest, where the trees thickened and the shadows deepened into an almost tangible presence. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a twilight so dark it felt as though the world itself was holding its breath. Here, reality began to bend, the line between the waking world and the hollow blurred like mist over the lake. Hannah tightened her grip on the worn leather-bound journal she had brought, a relic filled with cryptic notes passed down by her ancestors, the only known guide to traversing the hollow. The others carried relics and charms Miriam had provided, salt, iron, herbs, and a silver dagger said to pierce the unseen. This place, Miriam whispered, her voice barely audible, is where memories and shadows mingle. The hollow is a place of loss, pain, and forgotten things. The Guardian's realm. Mark glanced around nervously as the forest grew silent, the usual chorus of crickets and rustling leaves replaced by a deep, oppressive stillness. Jordan swallowed hard. It feels wrong. Like the forest itself is watching. Alyssa nodded, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. I don't know what's waiting for us in there, but I can feel it pulling at me. They stepped into the darkness. At first, the forest was much as they remembered, towering pines stretching into the night, the occasional snap of a twig beneath their feet. But with every step, the air thickened, sounds faded, and shadows twisted unnaturally. A path appeared, a narrow trail marked by strange symbols etched into bark and stone. The group followed, eyes alert. Suddenly, the world shifted. The trees warped, their trunks elongating and bending at impossible angles. The ground beneath their feet turned soft, like walking on a living creature's skin. The sky overhead vanished, replaced by a swirling canopy of dark clouds pulsing with an eerie greenish light. Hannah gasped. We've crossed over. Miriam nodded gravely. Welcome to the Hollow. The Hollow was a realm built from memory and fear, a place where time lost meaning. The forest here whispered secrets, voices of lost souls and forgotten nightmares threading through the air like a dark symphony. Figures emerged from the mist, shadows with flickering faces, echoes of the past. Some reached out with translucent hands, others whispered names long dead. The friends gripped their charms tighter, murmuring protective chants. As they ventured deeper, the guardian revealed itself, not a single form, but a shifting mass of darkness and light, woven from broken memories and sorrow. Its voice resonated inside their minds, a low, mournful sound that echoed with the pain of countless souls. Why do you seek me? It asked. Hannah stepped forward, heart pounding. We want to end the curse. To free ourselves and the land. The guardian's form shimmered, revealing fragments of the house, the lake, the forest, images of the torment they had endured. Then face your truth, it whispered. Suddenly, the hollow warped again, drawing each of them into their own memory-turned nightmare. Mark found himself back at the burning house, flames licking the sky, screams echoing. This time, he saw a shadowy figure standing in the flames, a child silhouette that mirrored his own guilt and fear. Alyssa was trapped in the carnival tent again, laughter twisted into screams, the shadowy figure reaching for her desperately. Jordan faced a twisted forest, its trees bleeding shadows, while the voices of his father's silence pressed on his mind. Hannah confronted a shattered mirror, each fragment reflecting her loneliness and pain. They fought through their fears, calling out to each other across the shifting hollow, their voices anchors in the dreamlike chaos. Together, they pushed past the darkness, each step breaking the chains of memory that bound them. Back in the hollow center, the guardian waited, its form shrinking as the friends' resolve grew. "You have faced yourselves," it said softly. "And for that, you are free." The hollow began to dissolve, shadows melting into dawn's first light. Exhausted but unbroken, they emerged from the forest's edge. The sun rose over Pine Hollow Campground, golden light spilling across the land like a promise. The curse was broken. For good. The first rays of morning sun stretched gently over Pine Hollow Campground, casting warm golden light on the damp earth and rustling leaves. The oppressive fog that had clung to the woods for so long was gone, replaced by a clear, serene sky. The air was fresh, scented with pine and wildflowers, life seemed to be breathing anew. Mark, Hannah, Alyssa, Jordan, and Dr. Miriam Walsh stood together at the forest's edge, watching as the last shadows of the hollow melted away beneath the light. They had done it. The curse had been broken. But even as relief swept through them, a heavy silence settled. The world felt different, like waking from a long, haunting dream but struggling to remember the nightmare's edges. Though the forest was free, their minds were still tethered to the horrors they had faced. Mark closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the past weeks pressing down on him. "I don't think it's over," he said quietly. Hannah nodded. The curse was tied to the land, yes. But it was also tied to us. Our memories, our pain. Alyssa's voice trembled. "It feels like there's still something watching. Waiting." Jordan's gaze drifted to the horizon. "Maybe the curse is broken, but the scars remain." In the days that followed, each of them wrestled with the quiet aftermath. Mark found solace in nature, spending long hours walking the now peaceful forest, seeking a connection to something real and grounding. But at night, his dreams still flickered with flames and whispers. Hannah poured herself into writing, documenting everything, hopes, fears, memories. Her journal was a lifeline, a way to hold the past without being consumed by it. Alyssa sought support, opening up to friends and therapists, determined not to let the shadows claim her again. Jordan, ever restless, trained his mind and body, preparing for anything that might come next. And Miriam? She delved deeper into ancient texts, searching for knowledge that might protect others from the hollow's grasp. One afternoon, as the group reunited at a local cafe, a stranger approached their table, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm, knowing smile. "I've been watching," she said quietly. "You've done something remarkable, breaking a curse that bound this land for generations." Mark studied her cautiously. "Who are you?" "I'm called many things," she replied. "But you can call me Elise. I'm a guardian of sorts, one who watches over places where darkness gathers." Hannah's eyes widened. "So there are others?" Elise nodded. "Yes. The hollow was one wound in a much larger network. There are other places like Pine Hollow, other curses waiting to be broken." The weight of that revelation settled heavily on them. Their journey had ended, but the fight against darkness was far from over. Elise offered guidance and knowledge, a path forward for those willing to walk it. Together, they began to understand that their battle was part of something greater, a hidden war between light and shadow woven through the very fabric of the world. That night, as Mark lay awake, he felt a quiet peace for the first time in weeks. The shadows were still there, in memory, in scar tissue, but they no longer ruled him. Outside, the wind whispered softly through the trees. And somewhere deep in the forest, the land breathed free. The days following their encounter with Elise were filled with a strange blend of hope and solemn responsibility. The warmth of the sun seemed sharper now, but beneath it all lay a quiet awareness. The darkness they had faced at Pine Hollow was but one thread in a vast tapestry of shadows woven across the world. Mark found himself drawn back to the forest, not as a frightened victim but as a sentinel. Every morning, he walked the paths that once felt like traps and prisons, now transformed into quiet sanctuaries of moss and light. Yet, he remained vigilant, ever watchful for signs that the hollow might stir again. One evening, as twilight draped the sky in hues of deep purple and amber, the group gathered in Dr. Miriam Walsh's cluttered study, a place that had become their command center. Maps littered the walls, marked with symbols and notes. Old tomes sat open on the heavy wooden table, their pages filled with forgotten knowledge. Elise sat among them, a calm presence, eyes reflecting the flicker of candlelight. "We stand at the threshold," she began, voice steady yet urgent. "The boundary between our world and the realms of shadow and memory is fragile. Curses like the one at Pine Hollow are symptoms of fractures, weak points in that boundary. Our role now is to protect those points, to guard the threshold." Hannah leaned forward, determination etched on her face. "But how? How do we fight something so vast, so ancient?" Elise smiled faintly. "With knowledge, with vigilance, and with courage. You've already shown you possess these in abundance. But the path ahead will test you like never before." Alyssa's voice was quiet but firm. "We won't turn away. If darkness threatens others, we'll stand." Jordan nodded, fists clenched. "We're not just survivors. We're guardians." Their training began in earnest. Miriam taught them to read ancient texts, to recognize signs of dark influence in people and places. Elise trained them in rituals of protection, circles of salt and iron, chants that wove light into the air. They practiced walking between worlds, meditating to sense the threads of memory and shadow that lay hidden beneath everyday life. Mark discovered an unexpected strength in these sessions, a calm focus that steadied the chaos inside him. Hannah found purpose in cataloging their experiences, writing down every detail, every encounter, as a guide for those who might follow. Alyssa learned to harness her fear, turning it into a shield that protected not only herself but those around her. Jordan faced his restless spirit head-on, channeling his turmoil into relentless discipline and focus. As weeks turned to months, their bond deepened, not just as friends, but as a team forged by fire and shadow. They traveled to other sites marked on ancient maps, places where the boundary thinned, abandoned towns swallowed by forest, forgotten burial grounds whispered to be cursed, and silent lakes that mirrored worlds beyond. At each, they found echoes of the hollow, darkness lingering, memories twisted into nightmares, guardians trapped or broken. Together, they repaired what they could, releasing trapped souls and sealing fractures with rituals older than memory. But the work was never done. One cold autumn night, as the wind howled outside Miriam's study, a new message arrived, a letter, written in shaky script, its edges singed as if touched by flame. It read, "The darkness stirs anew. Pine Hollow's wound was but a symptom. Beware the coming shadow. The Hollow's guardian awakens." A chill passed through the group. Elisa's eyes darkened. The battle is far from over. Mark clenched his jaw, feeling the weight of the promise and the burden it carried. "We will be ready," he said quietly. Outside, the forest whispered secrets, and the night stretched on, vast and endless. The guardians stood watch, at the threshold between worlds, prepared to face whatever darkness awaited. The weeks after receiving the ominous letter unfolded like a slow-burning storm, each day heavy with the weight of unseen dread. The air outside Miriam's study had taken on a sharp, electric charge, a tension that sent shivers skittering across skin, even inside the warmth of walls. The group gathered nightly, the flicker of candles casting long shadows that danced along the cracked plaster and lined bookshelves. Maps, grimoires, and notes cluttered the heavy oak table, but the unease that settled over them was heavier than any stack of paper. Elise sat at the head of the table, her gaze dark and focused. The Guardian's awakening is a warning and a call. Something stirs in the depths of the hollow, something older, darker than before. We must act swiftly. Mark rubbed his tired eyes. We thought sealing the fracture was the end. But now it feels like the beginning of something worse. Alyssa nodded, voice barely steady. I've been seeing things, shadows at the edge of vision, strange figures watching me in the city. It's like the darkness is spreading. Jordan paced the room, restless as ever. If the Guardian awakens fully, the boundary could collapse. The hollow could consume everything. Hannah's fingers trembled as she traced symbols in her journal. I've been researching legends, stories of ancient spirits, vengeful entities bound to the land. Some say the Guardian was once a protector, twisted by sorrow and rage. Miriam leaned forward, voice steady. Our task is to confront this corrupted Guardian. To understand its pain and offer it release before it unravels the world. Days blended into nights as the group prepared for what lay ahead. They traveled to distant places where shadows lingered, old churches swallowed by ivy, forgotten crossroads where spirits whispered, and deep caves that breathed cold and dark. At each site, they performed rituals of cleansing and binding, their efforts slow but steady. Each success brought a small victory, a balm for the restless land. But the darkness was cunning. One evening, as Mark returned home after a long day in the woods, he found his apartment door ajar. Inside, the faint smell of smoke lingered, and shards of broken glass scattered across the floor. On the wall, scrawled in a shaky hand, was a single word, return. His heart hammered. The curse was reaching for him again, closer than ever. That night, sleep was impossible. Visions haunted him, flashes of the house engulfed in flame, whispers echoing in the dark, the doll's eyes burning red. A voice, cold and distant, whispered. You cannot escape. The hollow calls. He wasn't alone. Across town, Alyssa awoke to a shadow sitting at the foot of her bed, silent, watching. Jordan felt icy hands grasp his shoulders during his restless dreams, pulling him toward darkness. Hannah's journals filled with new writings, warnings she had never penned, messages from the Guardian itself. The group convened again, faces pale, eyes haunted. Elisa's voice was grim. The Guardian's power grows. It seeks to break free, to reclaim the land and all who have touched its curse. Miriam nodded. We must find the source of its pain. Only understanding will grant us a chance. Their search led them back to Pine Hollow. Underneath the gnarled tree at the heart of the campground, they discovered a hidden chamber, ancient and carved with symbols older than the forest. Inside, a small wooden box sat untouched, bound with iron and sealed with wax. Opening it revealed a faded photograph, a locket, and a note. To the one who guards the forest, forgive me. I was lost. I was afraid. The pieces began to fall into place. The Guardian was not just a spirit of rage, it was a soul trapped in sorrow, bound by betrayal and pain. Their mission was no longer just a battle, it was a chance to heal. As night fell once more, the Guardians prepared to face the heart of the hollow, to confront the sorrow that birthed the darkness and, perhaps, to finally set it free. The air was thick with damp earth and ancient secrets as Mark, Hannah, Alyssa, Jordan, Miriam, and Elise stood at the base of the gnarled tree in Pine Hollow campground. The once blackened bark now shimmered faintly, alive with a strange, soft glow, as if the land itself were breathing in anticipation. Their breaths came in shallow clouds, mingling with the cool night air. The hidden chamber beneath the roots was a portal to the past, a gateway to the source of the Guardian's anguish. Every instinct screamed at them to turn away, but the weight of responsibility bound them forward. Elise knelt before the iron-bound box, her fingers trembling as she traced the faded wax seal. With a careful twist, she broke the seal, and the lid creaked open, releasing a scent like damp leather and forgotten memories. Inside lay a delicate locket, tarnished with age, and a faded photograph of a young woman, serene, yet eyes filled with a quiet sadness. Beneath them, a note in looping script. To the one who guards the forest, forgive me. I was lost. I was afraid. Hannah's voice was barely audible. This is a plea. From the past. Someone connected to the guardian. Mark studied the photograph, a knot tightening in his chest. Who was she? And why is she bound to the curse? Miriam stepped forward, her face solemn. Legends speak of a woman named Elara, a healer, a protector of these woods. Betrayed by those she trusted, she was consumed by sorrow and despair. Her spirit twisted, becoming the guardian we faced. Alyssa swallowed hard. So, the guardian isn't evil. It's broken. Jordan's jaw clenched. And it's been trapped in its pain for centuries. The chamber was small, carved from roots and earth, walls etched with symbols of protection and sorrow. Elise knelt beside the box, closing her eyes. To heal the guardian, we must reach its heart. To do that, we must walk through its memories, the moments that bound it here. One by one, they placed their hands on the locket. A sudden rush of cold swept through them, and the chamber blurred and shifted. They were no longer standing beneath the tree, instead, they found themselves inside a memory, vivid and raw. The forest was alive with vibrant color, birdsong filling the air. A young woman moved through the trees, Elara. Her smile was gentle, her hands tending to the wounded and the sick. She was a beacon of hope, light in the dark woods. But shadows gathered at the edge of the clearing, whispers of betrayal and fear. They watched as Elara was accused, her name twisted by jealous voices. The people she trusted turned away, fearing the darkness they didn't understand. Her heart broke. The memory twisted, flames erupted, consuming the village, consuming Elara's hope. Mark gasped, tears pricking his eyes. She was betrayed by those she loved, he whispered. Alyssa reached out, feeling the weight of Elara's sorrow. The scene shifted again, now Elara stood at the edge of the lake, clutching the locket tightly. She whispered a plea for forgiveness, a promise to protect the forest forever. The water reflected her broken soul. Hannah looked around, voice trembling. The guardian's pain is tied to this locket. It's her last connection to the world she lost. Miriam nodded. If we can free Elara from her sorrow, we can break the curse for good. Their journey through the memory was a delicate dance of light and shadow, confronting grief, anger, and loneliness. They reached out to Elara's spirit with words of compassion, of understanding. Slowly, the oppressive weight began to lift. Back in the chamber, the locket glowed softly. The air hummed with renewed energy. Outside, the forest seemed to sigh in relief. The guardian's presence faded, not with a scream, but with a whisper of thanks carried on the wind. The curse that had haunted Pine Hollow for centuries was finally at peace. As dawn broke, the friends emerged from the chamber, exhausted, but unburdened. The forest was alive, vibrant, and free. But as Mark looked back at the roots of the gnarled tree, he knew this was only one victory in a larger battle. The darkness still lingered in places unseen. And they, the guardians, were its watchful wardens. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the branches of Pine Hollow, painting the forest floor in a golden glow that felt almost sacred. The oppressive weight that had hung over the woods for so long was lifted, replaced by a quiet serenity that seemed to pulse with newfound life. Birds sang their morning songs, and a gentle breeze stirred the leaves as if the forest itself was breathing a deep sigh of relief. Mark, Hannah, Alyssa, Jordan, Miriam, and Elise stood together at the clearing's edge, their faces illuminated by the soft dawn. Their bodies were weary, marked by the battles they had fought, but their spirits were lighter than they had been in months, maybe years. They had faced the darkness, confronted ancient sorrow, and brought peace to the guardian. But peace came with its own complications. The curse was broken, but the scars it left behind were deep, etched into their very souls. Hannah opened her journal, writing with a steady hand as the others watched. "We freed a soul today," she said softly. "But the weight of what we've seen doesn't just disappear. We carry it with us." Alyssa nodded, her eyes misty. "The forest is alive again. But so are the memories. Sometimes I feel like the darkness is still whispering, just beyond the edges of our minds." Jordan glanced toward the trees, a restless energy still crackling in his movements. "It's like we're standing on the edge of something bigger." The Guardian was only part of the story. Miriam's gaze was sharp. "Indeed. There are many wounds like this one, scattered across the land. Places where pain and sorrow have twisted into curses." Elise stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. "Our work here has changed us. We are no longer just survivors, we are guardians. Protectors of the fragile boundary between worlds." Mark exhaled slowly, the weight of that responsibility settling over him. "But how do we do that? How do we watch over places we don't even know exist?" Elise smiled faintly. "With vigilance, knowledge, and each other. This forest, this land, it will teach us. The Hollow is part of a larger network, connected by memory and spirit." The days that followed were a mixture of reflection and preparation. The group pored over ancient texts and maps, identifying other sites where the veil between worlds was thin. They trained their minds and bodies, learning rituals of protection and ways to sense disturbances in the natural order. Mark found comfort in the forest, each walk a meditation, a way to connect with the living land they had saved. Hannah continued documenting their journey, her words a bridge between past and future. Alyssa sought out others who had experienced similar darkness, weaving a network of support and knowledge. Jordan embraced his restless spirit, channeling it into determination and strength. One evening, gathered around a campfire deep in the woods, the group shared stories and plans. Elise looked into the flames, her eyes reflecting the dancing light. "The darkness is patient," she said. "It waits for cracks to widen, for wounds to reopen. But together, we can be the light that holds it back." Miriam added, "We are the line between shadow and dawn. The guardians of the threshold." As the fire crackled and the stars emerged overhead, a sense of calm settled among them. They were changed, scarred but unbroken. The forest around them hummed with life and promise. And somewhere, deep within the earth, the Hollow slept once more. But the war was far from over. The Guardians knew their journey had only just begun. The glow of the campfire cast flickering shadows over the faces of Mark, Hannah, Alyssa, Jordan, Miriam, and Elise as they sat in a tight circle beneath the towering pines. The forest around them seemed alive with whispered secrets, the gentle rustling of leaves punctuating the silence that settled between their conversations. It was the kind of quiet that felt both comforting and unsettling, the peace before a storm. Their victory at Pine Hollow had left them bound together, not just by friendship, but by a shared burden, the responsibility of guarding the fragile line between their world and the realms of shadow. Yet, that night, beneath the vast canopy of stars, a new unease began to take root. Elisa's voice broke the stillness. The Guardian's curse was only one of many fractures. The land remembers, and the darkness stirs in other places. Miriam nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "We've identified several sites, places where pain and sorrow have hardened into curses, where the veil grows thin and the Hollow's influence creeps." Alyssa leaned forward, her gaze steady. "Are we ready to face them? To travel beyond Pine Hollow?" Jordan cracked his knuckles, a determined edge to his voice. "We have to be. Darkness doesn't rest, and neither can we." Mark swallowed hard. The thought of venturing into unknown horrors was terrifying, but their resolve was firm. The forest had tested them, but it had also strengthened them. The following days were a whirlwind of preparation. They gathered supplies, salt, iron, protective charms, and pored over maps ancient and new, marking places whispered about in legends and dark folklore. Their training intensified. Miriam taught them meditative techniques to focus their minds, while Elise shared knowledge passed down from generations of guardians. They practiced rituals to cleanse and seal fractures, each ceremony a delicate balance of ancient power and modern will. Their first journey beyond Pine Hollow led them to an abandoned mining town nestled in the mountains, a place where hope had once thrived, now swallowed by greed and tragedy. As they approached the empty streets, the air grew thick with a heavy silence. The wind carried faint echoes of laughter and cries, memories trapped like shards of broken glass. In the heart of the town, they found a mine shaft, its entrance sealed with rusted iron gates etched with faded runes. Miriam examined the symbols carefully. This is a barrier, old, but weakening. The hollow's influence is seeping through. Elisa's voice was steady. We need to strengthen the seal, but first, we must confront the darkness feeding on the town's pain. That night, as darkness fell, the group prepared a circle of salt and iron. Candles flickered, and the air thrummed with energy. One by one, they entered the circle, hands joined, voices rising in an ancient chant. The ground trembled beneath them as shadows emerged, twisted figures of miners lost to greed and despair, their faces frozen in agony. Mark met their gaze, feeling the weight of their suffering. We're here to help, he said softly. The shadows hesitated, then reached out, not with malice, but with longing. The ritual unfolded in waves of light and shadow, a battle of wills as they sought to free the trapped souls and mend the fracture in the land. Alyssa's voice faltered, but Hannah's steady presence gave her strength. Jordan's restless energy surged into focus, driving back the darkness. Miriam and Elise guided them, weaving spells and chants that pulsed like a heartbeat. By dawn, the shadows had faded, replaced by a peaceful stillness. The air was lighter, the oppressive weight lifted. The town felt quieter, the ghosts released from their torment. Exhausted but triumphant, the group gathered outside the mine shaft, watching as the first light of morning bathed the mountains in gold. Elise smiled faintly. This is just the beginning. There are many more wounds to heal, many more battles ahead. Mark nodded, resolve hardening. We're ready. As they prepared to leave, a chill wind swept through the town, carrying with it a whisper, soft but clear. The hollow watches. The darkness waits. The guardians stood at the edge of the unknown, bound by purpose and haunted by shadows. The fight was far from over. But together, they would face the darkness, wherever it rose. The morning sun filtered weakly through the heavy clouds as the group made their way down the winding mountain road, leaving behind the abandoned mining town that still echoed faintly with the ghosts of its tragic past. The road was rough and lined with ancient trees, their branches swaying silently in the cold breeze, as if mourning the weight of memories buried beneath their roots. Mark's mind churned with the events of the previous night, the faces of the lost miners, the hollow ache in their eyes, the desperate yearning to be freed from the chains of sorrow. It was a pain he now carried with him, as if their stories had become threads woven into his own soul. We did what we could, Miriam said quietly from the passenger seat, her eyes scanning the ancient map spread across the dashboard. But places like that, they're like wounds that never fully heal. They leave scars on the land, and on us. Hannah nodded, pulling her jacket tighter around her as the chill seeped into the car. I keep thinking about Elara, how her pain twisted the guardian. How these curses aren't just evil, they're sadness and fear made manifest. Alyssa's voice was soft but resolute. Which means we have to find the heart of that pain in every place we go. Not just fight shadows, but understand them. Jordan grunted in agreement, his eyes fixed on the darkening forest outside the window. Easy to say. Harder to do when the darkness is clawing at your mind. Their next destination was a small, forgotten village nestled in a valley shrouded by mist and silence. Locals avoided it, whispering of strange disappearances and a creeping darkness that seemed to seep from the earth itself. As they approached, the air grew heavier, thick with an almost tangible despair. The village was empty, houses boarded up and streets overgrown with weeds. The scent of damp earth and decay hung in the air, pressing down on them like a physical weight. Miriam led the group to the center of the village, where a weathered stone monument stood, covered in moss and carved with symbols both ancient and unfamiliar. "This," she said, tracing the worn glyphs with her fingers, "marks the site of a great tragedy. A mass loss of life, and the birth of another fracture, another wound in the fabric between worlds." Elise stepped forward, her gaze distant. "The hollow feeds on sorrow and fear. Places like this become breeding grounds for darkness." Mark clenched his fists, feeling the familiar pull in his chest, the call of the hollow, whispering promises of oblivion. That night, they prepared for another ritual. The air was cold, the sky heavy with clouds that blotted out the stars. Around a flickering fire, they formed their protective circle, hands joined, voices rising in unison as ancient words filled the night. The ground trembled beneath them as shadows emerged from the mist, twisted figures, faces contorted with grief and rage. The battle was not one of brute strength, but of wills, a desperate struggle to reach the souls trapped in their torment and guide them toward release. Mark felt the darkness clawing at his mind, dredging up memories he'd rather forget, the burning house, the porcelain doll's gaze, the echoing screams. But he focused on the faces before him, lost, frightened, desperate for peace. With a voice steady despite the fear, he called out, "You are not alone. We are here to help you." One by one, the shadows faltered, their forms dissolving into light. As dawn broke, the village was still. The heavy weight had lifted, replaced by a fragile calm. But the victory felt bittersweet. The scars remained, etched into the land and their souls. Back at their makeshift base, the group gathered around a worn table, exhaustion etched into their features. Elisa's voice was grave. "Each place we heal reveals another fracture. The hollow's web is vast and tangled." Miriam nodded. "And with each victory, the darkness fights harder. It will not surrender easily." Elisa looked around the room, determination burning in her eyes. "Then we keep fighting. For the land. For the souls lost." Jordan cracked his knuckles, a fierce smile breaking through his exhaustion. "We're in this together. No turning back." Mark stared out the window, the weight of their journey pressing down on him. The road ahead was long, filled with shadows and uncertainty. But beneath it all was a spark, a flicker of hope. They were guardians now. And they would face whatever darkness came next. The days that followed their cleansing of the forsaken village were marked by an eerie stillness, one that seemed to seep not only into the forest but deep into the hearts of Mark, Hannah, Alyssa, Jordan, Miriam, and Elise. The once unbreakable bond forged in fire and shadow was beginning to fray beneath the weight of exhaustion, the relentless burden of guardianship revealing cracks no ritual could mend. Mark found himself pacing the worn floorboards of his small cabin, staring out at the endless line of pines that stretched toward the horizon. The forest, once a place of refuge, now felt like a cage. Memories assaulted him unbidden, flames licking at the edges of his mind, whispers slithering through silence. Every night, the same dream, a house swallowed by smoke, a child's scream dissolving into darkness. He clenched his fists until his knuckles whitened, trying to anchor himself to reality. But the shadows followed him like a persistent storm cloud, dark and unyielding. Hannah sat alone in the dim glow of her study, journal open but blank. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, fragments of memories, visions from the hollow, and the ever-present question, was it enough? Had their efforts truly made a difference, or were they merely mending cracks destined to break wide open? Her hands trembled as she picked up her pen, the weight of countless untold stories pressing down. She was the keeper of their history, yet she feared the story might never have an ending. Alyssa, restless and haunted, found little peace even among friends. Her nights were restless, plagued by fleeting shadows and the echo of unseen footsteps. She recoiled at every unexpected sound, every flicker of light, as if the darkness sought to consume her from within. Her once radiant smile was now a fragile mask, cracked and worn. Jordan, ever the stoic warrior, fought a silent battle of his own. His body bore the scars of their travels, bruises, scratches, the ache of sleepless nights, but it was the unseen wounds that cut deepest. He struggled to balance his fierce protectiveness with the vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. The weight of leadership pressed heavily on his broad shoulders, threatening to crush him beneath its relentless force. Miriam and Elise watched their friends with growing concern. The burden of guardianship was exacting a toll none had anticipated. Sleepless nights, frayed nerves, and quiet despair whispered threats more insidious than any shadow. Elise spoke softly during a rare moment of quiet. The hollow tests us, not just with darkness, but with ourselves. Miriam nodded gravely. We must be vigilant, not only of the world without but of the world within. Their sanctuary was shattered one cold evening when a desperate knock echoed through the door. A stranger stood there, face obscured by a hood, eyes sharp with urgency. "I bring news," the figure said. "A new fracture has opened, one deeper and more dangerous than any before. The hollow spreads beyond Pine Hollow." The group gathered once more, the fragile thread of hope rekindled amid fresh fear. Maps were unfurled, whispers traced across ancient parchment. The fracture lay in the heart of a forgotten forest, miles from their known world, where the veil between realms thinned dangerously. Preparation began anew. But this time, the weight felt heavier. The darkness was no longer distant, it was hunting them. As they set out toward the unknown, each carried their own shadows, fears, doubts, and the crushing sense that their journey might be endless. Yet beneath it all burned a fierce determination. They were guardians, bound by purpose and unyielding hope. And no matter the cost, they would stand against the darkness. The road stretched ahead like a twisted ribbon of forgotten time, winding through shadowed valleys and dense forests untouched by sunlight for decades. Mark, Hannah, Alyssa, Jordan, Miriam, and Elise traveled with measured steps, their gear heavy on their backs and heavier still the weight of what they carried inside, memories of pain, flickering hope, and a shared determination to face whatever lurked beyond the veil. The forest surrounding them was ancient, the trees towering and gnarled, their bark scarred by centuries of storms and silence. Moss clung thickly to branches and stones, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a smell that spoke of endings and forgotten beginnings. "This place," Miriam whispered, voice low and reverent, "is known among the old folk as the forest between worlds. It's where the boundaries are thinnest, where shadows bleed through the cracks, and time folds over itself like worn fabric." Elise nodded, eyes scanning the dim canopy. "Few who enter here return unchanged, if they return at all." Alyssa shivered despite the warmth of her coat. "It feels like the forest is watching us." Jordan, ever the sentinel, moved ahead with a cautious gait, his senses sharp. "It's alive, in a way. Not just trees and animals. Something older." Mark's gaze lingered on the twisting path, feeling the pulse of the land beneath his boots. "The hollow's tendrils reach farther than we imagined." As they ventured deeper, the forest seemed to shift subtly. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, and whispers curled through the air like smoke. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig set their nerves on edge. Suddenly, the path split, two trails diverging like the branches of a broken tree. One led toward a faint glow shimmering through the mist, the other plunged into darkness so complete it seemed to swallow light itself. "We need to choose," Hannah said, voice tight with uncertainty. Elise studied the signs carved into the trees, ancient runes glowing faintly with silver light. "The light is a lure, but not necessarily a safe one. The dark path is perilous, but it may lead to the fracture." Jordan cracked his knuckles. "I say we take the dark road. Whatever waits there, it's the truth we need." Their decision made, they stepped into the blackness. The forest swallowed them whole. Time began to twist. Moments stretched and folded, memories bleeding into reality. Mark's heart hammered as he caught glimpses of faces, friends and foes, memories he wished to forget. Hannah clutched her journal tightly, words blurring as the past and present collided. Alyssa's breath hitched as whispers curled around her mind, voices both pleading and threatening. Jordan's grip on his weapons tightened, his body taut as a bowstring. Miriam began chanting softly, weaving protection around them like a fragile shield. They arrived at a clearing where the veil between worlds thinned to a fragile thread. At its center, a fissure pulsed, a wound in the earth glowing with a sickly green light, veins of shadow creeping outward like poison. Elise stepped forward, her eyes shining with fierce determination. This is the fracture. The hollow's new wound. The ground trembled as shadows emerged, twisted creatures born of sorrow and rage, eyes burning with hunger. The guardians steeled themselves. The battle was brutal, a clash of light and shadow, will and despair. Mark found himself face to face with a monstrous shape, its form shifting, a nightmare woven from his deepest fears. But he held fast, calling on memories of hope and love to push back the darkness. Hannah's voice rang clear, chanting words of power that cut through the shadows like blades. Alyssa moved with grace, weaving protective wards that shielded them from the worst of the assault. Jordan fought with relentless fury, his strikes driving back the twisted forms. Miriam and Elise stood at the circle's edge, weaving ancient magics that sealed and healed. After what felt like hours, the shadows began to waver, their forms dissolving into mist. The fracture pulsed one last time, then sealed with a quiet snap, leaving behind a calm that felt almost unnatural. Exhausted and wounded, the guardians collapsed to the forest floor, breaths ragged but hearts resolute. They had faced the hollow's new wound, and survived. But the forest whispered still, a promise and a warning. The battle was far from over. The clearing lay still, a fragile silence hanging thick in the air as the last tendrils of shadow dissolved like mist at dawn. The forest, ancient and watchful, seemed to exhale a slow, trembling breath. The wound in the earth was sealed, but the echoes of its pain rippled far beyond the confines of that sacred place. Mark lay sprawled on the mossy ground, every muscle aching, sweat mixing with dirt on his skin. His chest rose and fell with ragged breaths, but inside, a storm raged, the remnants of the nightmare that had clawed at him during the battle. He could still feel the presence of that monstrous shape, a twisted mirror of his darkest fears, gnawing at his resolve. Hannah knelt beside him, her fingers trembling as she closed her journal. "We did it," she whispered, voice barely steady. "But at what cost?" Alyssa leaned against a tree, eyes distant, haunted by the shadows she'd faced. "The hollow doesn't just take from the land. It takes from us. Our strength, our peace." Jordan sat nearby, rubbing a fresh bruise, jaw tight. "We pushed it back this time. But it's learning. Adapting." Miriam's eyes scanned the darkening sky, lips moving silently in prayer. Elise stood apart, shoulders squared but eyes heavy with unspoken burdens. The journey back to their base was slow and silent. The forest, once again cloaked in quiet, seemed to watch their every step. Each carried invisible wounds, fear, doubt, exhaustion, that no amount of courage could fully heal. Back at their sanctuary, the weight of the recent battle settled deep into their bones. Days blurred into nights as they tended to their physical injuries, but the mental toll was far harder to mend. Mark found himself pacing the small room he'd claimed, unable to shake the relentless images that invaded his dreams, flames licking at walls, voices calling his name in the dark. The forest's shadows had etched themselves into his mind. Hannah spent long hours writing, pouring every fear and hope onto the pages of her journal. Her words were a balm and a curse, a way to hold the chaos inside, but also a reminder of the darkness they fought. Alyssa sought solace in the quiet moments, meditation and whispered prayers that calmed her restless spirit, though the shadows still lingered at the edge of her vision. Jordan trained relentlessly, trying to steel himself against the creeping despair, but even his iron will faltered beneath the weight of uncertainty. Miriam and Elise worked tirelessly, researching, planning, preparing. The ancient knowledge they guarded was both a shield and a chain, binding them to a destiny that seemed as vast as the forest itself. One evening, as twilight deepened and the wind whispered secrets through the pines, a knock echoed through their base. A stranger stood at the door, eyes sharp, face lined with worry. In their hands, an ancient artifact pulsed with faint, ominous light. "I bring warnings," the stranger said, voice urgent. "The fractures are spreading faster. The hollow's hunger grows. And something darker rises, something older than any of us." The guardians gathered around the artifact, the air thick with tension and foreboding. Elisa's voice was steady but grave. "This is no longer just a battle for the land. It is a battle for the soul of the world itself." Mark met the gaze of his friends, the weight of their shared fate pressing down like the shadow of the forest. They stood at the edge of a new, darker journey, one that would test every fragment of their courage, strength, and hope. The hollow's echo was growing louder. And the night was far from over. The days following the stranger's arrival were heavy with urgency and dread. The artifact they now guarded was a tangible pulse of the darkness creeping ever closer, a grim reminder that the hollow's reach extended far beyond the forgotten forests and abandoned villages. It was as if the very earth beneath their feet was fracturing, bleeding sorrow and shadow into every corner of the world. Mark sat with the artifact cradled in his hands, feeling the cold hum of its power seep into his skin. It was alive, ancient and restless, whispering secrets he could barely understand. The air around it shimmered faintly, shadows twisting and curling like living things. Elise gathered the group in their dimly lit base, the walls lined with maps, ancient texts, and talismans. Her voice was steady but filled with an urgent gravity. "This artifact is a beacon, a heart of the hollow's growing darkness. It calls to others like it, gathering strength." Miriam nodded, her fingers tracing a faded symbol in a worn book. "Legends speak of the Black Convergence, a time when the fractures align, when the hollow's power peaks and the boundary between worlds almost breaks." Hannah's eyes were wide with worry. "How long before it happens?" Elisa's gaze darkened. "Soon. We don't have much time." The group knew that to stand against the coming storm, they would need allies. They reached out to those who had encountered the darkness, mystics, historians, and others touched by the hollow's curse. But trust was fragile, and fear ran deep. One by one, new faces joined them, a grizzled hunter who knew the forest's secrets, a scholar versed in forbidden lore, a quiet woman who claimed to hear the voices of the lost. Together, they formed a fragile coalition, united by fear and hope. Yet, even among their ranks, doubt festered. Whispers of betrayal slipped through the shadows. Mark found himself questioning the motives of their new allies, wondering who might be tempted by the darkness. One night, as the group gathered around the fire, a sudden chill fell over the clearing. The flames flickered and dimmed, shadows lengthening unnaturally. A figure stepped from the darkness, tall, cloaked, eyes glowing faint red. The air thickened with menace. "I am the Harbinger," the figure intoned, voice like the grinding of ancient stone. "The hollows will made flesh. The fractures are gateways, and I am their keeper." A hush fell over the group, fear gripping their hearts. The Harbinger raised a hand, and the forest seemed to scream, a howl that rattled bones and shattered resolve. The guardians braced themselves, weapons drawn, magic humming in the air. The battle that followed was unlike any before, a clash of light and shadow, will and despair. The Harbinger wielded powers that twisted reality, bending the forest to its dark will. Mark fought with every ounce of strength, calling on memories of hope and love to push back the darkness. Hannah's chants wove shields of light around them, while Alyssa moved with fierce grace, her wards holding against the relentless assault. Jordan's fury was a storm, driving the Harbinger back step by agonizing step. Miriam and Elise channeled ancient energies, weaving spells that bound and banished. But the Harbinger was relentless. With a final, terrible scream, it vanished, but not without leaving a promise. "This is only the beginning," the voice echoed. "The hollow will rise. The fractures will consume all." The group stood shaken but unbroken. The fight for the soul of the world had begun in earnest. The dawn broke cold and gray, casting long shadows across the clearing where the guardians regrouped after the terrifying confrontation with the Harbinger. The forest around them, once seeming almost alive with whispered secrets, now felt heavy, laden with a silence so thick it pressed against their very souls. The battle had left more than bruises and exhaustion, it had cracked the foundation of their unity. Mark sat on a fallen log, staring at the faint glow of the ancient artifact resting in his lap. The cold pulse from it throbbed like a heartbeat, a constant reminder of the darkness still growing beyond their reach. His mind churned with memories of the Harbinger's words, the promise of an all-consuming hollow and fracture swallowing the world whole. Fear gnawed at him, but deeper than that was an ache of doubt. Had they underestimated the enemy? Had their fragile alliance with new allies weakened rather than strengthened their cause? Hannah paced nearby, clutching her journal, her hands trembling as she tried to focus on words but found her thoughts tangled in uncertainty. "We need answers," she muttered to herself, voice cracking under the weight of unspoken fears. "We need to understand the fractures, the source before the black convergence." Elise, ever composed, approached quietly. "The fractures are like wounds in the fabric of reality, feeding on sorrow, pain, and fear. But the source is still a mystery. That is what we must uncover before the fractures spread beyond repair." Alyssa's voice broke into the tense silence. "And what about trust? We welcomed others into our circle, and now? I don't know who to believe." Her eyes darted around the group, haunted by shadows only she seemed to see. Jordan's fists clenched. "We can't afford doubt, not now. The darkness feeds on division. We have to hold together." Miriam nodded solemnly but kept her gaze distant. "But it's true. The strain is showing. We're all carrying burdens, fears we don't speak aloud. If we break apart, the hollow wins." The group was fractured, not just by the outside threat, but from within. A heated debate erupted as old grievances surfaced, accusations of recklessness, disagreements over strategy, and mistrust of the new allies who had joined their cause. The air was thick with tension, every word laced with desperation and fear. Mark finally stood, voice rising above the clamor. "This fighting won't save us. We're stronger together, or we fail alone. We have to find the source of the fractures, and fast, before it's too late." Elise stepped beside him, calm and firm. "There is a place," she said quietly, "an ancient site where the veil is thinnest. The origin of the hollow's corruption may lie there. If we can reach it, we may find a way to stop the black convergence." Their mission was clear, but the journey would be perilous. They would face not only the external darkness but the shadows lurking within themselves. Preparations were made in tense silence. Packs were gathered, weapons checked, and rituals performed to strengthen their resolve and protect their spirits. The weight of what lay ahead pressed down on them, but beneath the fear was a flicker of hope, a stubborn flame refusing to be extinguished. As they set out toward the ancient site, the forest seemed to close around them, the path twisting and turning through thick fog and tangled undergrowth. The silence was broken only by their footsteps and the distant calls of unseen creatures. The deeper they traveled, the more the forest changed. Trees grew twisted and blackened, roots grasping like skeletal hands. The air was thick with a sense of watching eyes and whispered voices that seemed to come from the shadows themselves. At times, the group stumbled upon remnants of old rituals, charred symbols, broken talismans, and faded inscriptions hinting at ancient battles between light and dark. Mark's heart pounded as he led the way, the artifact's pulse growing stronger with every step. The forest seemed to resist them, testing their courage and will. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the underbrush, and shadows surged forward, twisted creatures born of the hollow's corruption. The guardians sprang into action. Magic flared, steel sang through the air, and desperate prayers wove a protective barrier around them. The fight was brutal and exhausting, each strike pushing them closer to the edge of their limits. The forest itself seemed to pulse with malevolence, as if feeding on the conflict. When the last shadow fell, the group paused to catch their breath. They had survived, but the battle had taken its toll. Bloodied and weary, they pressed onward, driven by the knowledge that the fate of the world hung in the balance. As night fell, they reached a clearing dominated by an ancient stone altar covered in moss and strange glyphs that pulsed faintly in the moonlight. The artifact in Mark's hands reacted violently, its glow intensifying. Elise approached cautiously. This is the heart of the fractures, the source of the hollow's corruption. Whatever power dwells here is the key to stopping the black convergence. The guardians gathered around the altar, hands trembling but hearts resolute. They prepared for the final confrontation, a battle not only against the darkness outside but the fears and fractures within themselves. The forest held its breath. The night was thick with shadows. And the fate of everything they loved teetered on the edge of a blade. The night air was thick and heavy, each breath tasting of damp earth and something darker, something ancient. The clearing around the stone altar felt charged, as if the very ground beneath them was alive and watching. The faint glow from the artifact in Mark's hands pulsed like a heartbeat, synchronized with the strange glyphs carved into the altar itself. Each throb sent ripples of unease through the group. Mark's fingers tightened around the artifact, the cold metal seeping into his skin, anchoring him. His mind spun with fragments of the battles they had fought, the faces of lost souls, the shadows clawing at their minds, and the haunting promise of the black convergence. Elise stepped forward, her eyes reflecting the faint luminescence. This altar, it's not just a site of power. It's the origin, the point where the veil between our world and the Hollow's realm first fractured. Miriam's voice was barely a whisper. And if the fracture here isn't sealed, the entire world could unravel. Hannah's fingers traced the glyphs, feeling the vibration beneath the moss and stone. We need to perform a ritual to close the fracture, but it will require more than magic, it will demand sacrifice. A hush fell over the group. The weight of those words settled heavily, pressing on their spirits like the cold night air. What kind of sacrifice? Alyssa asked, her voice trembling. Elise looked around the circle, eyes grave but steady. One of us must bind themselves to the fracture, become a guardian not just of the land, but of the veil itself. To hold the fracture closed, even as the darkness pushes to break through. Jordan's jaw clenched. You mean one of us will be trapped here, forever? The thought sent ripples of fear through the group. The idea of losing one of their own, of being separated by an unbreachable void, was almost unbearable. Mark swallowed hard, the weight of responsibility settling squarely on his shoulders. He looked at each of his friends, their faces pale in the moonlight, eyes shining with fear, courage, and trust. I'll do it, Mark said quietly, surprising even himself. If it means saving the world, saving all of you, I'll take the burden. Elise nodded solemnly. The ritual will be dangerous. It will bind your spirit to the fracture, but your body will remain here, weakened and tethered to this world. You will be the seal. Miriam stepped forward, placing a hand on Mark's shoulder. We will support you. But once begun, there's no turning back. Hannah opened her journal, preparing the incantation that would bind them all in the ritual. The group formed a circle around the altar, hands joined. The ancient glyphs glowed brighter, casting eerie shadows on the trees. The air thickened with power as Hannah began to chant, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. Elise and Miriam wove their magic into the ritual, weaving protective barriers and guiding the flow of energy. Alyssa and Jordan stood watch, guarding against the lingering shadows that prowled just beyond the circle. As the incantation grew, the ground trembled and the air shimmered. Mark felt a pull deep within his soul, a tugging, a calling from the fracture itself. The darkness fought to claim him, swirling around his mind like a tempest, whispering promises of freedom and power. But Mark clung to the faces of his friends, the hope that burned in their eyes. With a final cry, he stepped onto the altar. The glyphs blazed with blinding light, and a vortex of energy swirled around him. His body trembled, spirit stretched thin between worlds. The fracture pulsed violently, threatening to tear open. The guardians chanted louder, pouring their strength into the ritual. The forest itself seemed to scream. Then, with a final, shattering burst of light, the fracture sealed. The forest fell silent. Mark's body collapsed, exhausted but alive. For now, the hollow was held at bay. But the cost was clear. Mark was forever changed, his spirit bound to the fracture, a guardian in a realm between worlds. The others gathered around him, grief and gratitude tangled in their tears. Elise spoke softly. His sacrifice bought us time. But the hollow's shadow remains. The fight continues. The dawn broke over the silent forest, light spilling like a promise. The guardians stood united, scarred, weary, but unbroken. And beneath the pines, the lost campground slept once more. The first light of dawn filtered weakly through the thick canopy of pines, casting long, trembling shadows across the forest floor. The air was cool, heavy with dew and the lingering echo of ancient power. The clearing around the stone altar lay quiet now, but beneath its stillness simmered a tension that none of the guardians could escape. Mark lay on the mossy ground, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. Though his body remained, his spirit had crossed a threshold few could ever comprehend. Bound now to the fracture he had sealed, his consciousness drifted between worlds, torn between the familiar earth and the shadowed realm of the hollow. The toll was immediate and profound. His eyes, once bright and alive, now stared blankly at the sky, reflecting distant stars he could no longer touch. Hannah knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she brushed damp hair from his forehead. The journal she clutched earlier lay forgotten at her side. She stared into Mark's vacant eyes, the tears she had held back finally spilling free. "We're going to find a way," she whispered, voice cracking with desperation. "We have to. You can't be lost to us." Alyssa stood nearby, silent but trembling, her fingers clenched so tightly they were white-knuckled. The pain of Mark's sacrifice gnawed at her like a living thing. "He saved us," she murmured. "But at what cost?" Jordan paced the perimeter of the clearing, his usually steady demeanor cracked by a raw edge of fury and helplessness. "We owe him more than words can say," he growled, fists clenched. "We have to be better. Stronger. Or it was all for nothing." Miriam and Elise exchanged glances, their faces pale but resolute. The burden of their ancient knowledge was heavier than ever. Elise spoke softly, "The fracture is sealed for now, but it is fragile. Mark's spirit holds the line, but it weakens with every moment. The hollow will test him, and us." The group gathered their strength and retreated from the clearing, their hearts heavy but their mission unbroken. Each step away from the altar felt like leaving a piece of themselves behind, a price they paid willingly, but one that would haunt them forever. Back at their base, the atmosphere was somber and tense. The air was thick with unspoken fears and aching grief. The new allies who had joined their cause moved cautiously, aware of the fragile state the guardians were in. Trust, already frayed, hung by a thread. Days turned into weeks. Mark's body remained under their watchful care, but his mind slipped further into the shadowed realm, caught in a liminal space where the hollow whispered promises of release and power. The guardians worked tirelessly to maintain the protective wards that tethered him to the physical world, but with every moment, the barrier thinned. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the forest grew dark and cold, a soft glow pulsed from Mark's chest, the artifact's heartbeat echoing through his veins. Suddenly, his eyes flickered, and a weak voice escaped his lips. "Listen, the hollow, it's not just darkness. It's pain, fear, and something else, a hunger older than time." Elise leaned closer, eyes wide. "What do you mean?" Mark's gaze cleared briefly, and he whispered, "The fractures, they're not random. They're wounds from a forgotten war. A war between light and shadow. The hollow feeds on the pain left behind. If we don't heal the root, the fractures will never stop." The revelation sent ripples through the group. The battle they fought was not only against a creeping darkness but against a cycle of ancient hatred and sorrow that had shaped the very fabric of their world. Determined to find answers, the guardians turned to forgotten texts and forbidden knowledge, seeking a way to end the hollow's hunger once and for all. Their search took them deeper into the mysteries of the forest and the history buried beneath its roots. But as they delved deeper, new threats emerged from the shadows, creatures twisted by the hollow's influence, storms that bent reality, and whispers of a power rising in the depths of the hollow's realm, waiting to break free. The guardians faced not only the darkness without but the fractures within, their own fears, doubts, and the heavy cost of sacrifice. In the quiet moments between battles, they clung to hope, hope that Mark's sacrifice was not in vain, that their bonds could withstand the strain, and that the lost campground beneath the pines could one day rest in peace. The forest outside their base was alive with shadows and secrets. Every tree seemed to murmur in the wind, every rustle of leaves like a whisper from the depths of the earth itself. Mark's sacrifice hung over the group like a storm cloud, coloring every thought with doubt and sorrow. Yet despite the heavy weight pressing on their shoulders, the guardians knew their work was far from over. Hannah sat at a rough-hewn wooden table, poring over the ancient texts they had recovered in their search for answers. Her fingers traced the faded ink on brittle pages, worn by time and hidden from the eyes of the world. The language was archaic and fragmented, but one phrase repeated itself like a heartbeat beneath the words: the hollow feeds on wounds left unhealed, the roots of pain that bind the world. She closed the book, a shiver running down her spine. The hollow wasn't just a creature or a force, it was a symptom of a deep, ancient fracture within the earth and the souls that walked upon it. Elise approached quietly, her face grave but calm. "There is an old legend," she said softly, "of a place beneath the forest, a labyrinth of roots and stone where the first fracture was born. It is said that there lies the heart of the hollow's pain, and if we can find it, we might finally heal the wound." The group agreed quickly. It was a dangerous path, but the only path left. They prepared for a journey deep beneath the forest floor, into the roots and darkness where few dared to tread. Supplies were gathered, wards were strengthened, and farewells whispered to the fragile light that still flickered in Mark's fading eyes. As they descended into the undergrowth, the forest above seemed to close in behind them, the canopy thickening until the sky was no more than a distant memory. The air grew thick with damp earth and the scent of decay, ancient and living all at once. The roots twisted and curled like serpents, weaving a labyrinth that swallowed sound and light. Their footsteps echoed faintly, swallowed by the oppressive silence that pressed upon them. Miriam lit a small lantern, its warm glow casting dancing shadows on the tangled walls. "This place is older than the forest itself," she whispered, voice echoing softly. "The wounds we seek lie deep." As they moved further into the labyrinth, whispers began to rise, soft, sorrowful voices threading through the roots like a mournful song. The hollow's presence was undeniable here, a coldness that seeped into their bones and clawed at their minds. Hannah shivered. "It's as if the forest is remembering, mourning." Suddenly, the path opened into a vast cavern where the roots twisted like enormous veins, pulsating faintly with a sickly green light. At the cavern's center lay a pool of black water, still and dark as obsidian. Elise stepped forward. "This is the heart, the source of the fracture." Mark's voice echoed in their minds, a faint tether pulling at their souls. "The hollow feeds on pain, but it can also be starved. We must face the source, or it will consume us all." The guardians formed a circle around the pool, hands joined. They began the ritual to cleanse the heart, chanting words of healing and protection, weaving light into the darkness that clawed at the edges of their vision. But the hollow would not give up its heart so easily. From the shadows, a creature emerged, vast and twisted, formed from the very roots and earth around them. Its eyes burned with ancient sorrow and rage. The battle that followed was unlike any before, a clash of hope and despair, light and shadow. The cavern trembled with every strike, the air thick with the sound of magic and the roar of the forest's pain. Mark's presence stirred in the fracture, a beacon of strength guiding them. Despite the darkness threatening to overwhelm them, the guardians pressed on, driven by a desperate hope that the heart could be healed. With a final surge of power, the creature shattered into shards of light and shadow, dissolving into the cavern's depths. The pool stilled, its dark surface reflecting a soft, pure glow. Exhausted but victorious, the guardians rose. The fracture's heart had been cleansed, but the forest still whispered, a reminder that healing was a journey, not an end. Back above ground, the first rays of sunlight pierced the canopy, bathing the lost campground in golden light. The forest seemed to breathe easier, the shadows retreating for now. But the hollow's echo remained, a quiet warning carried on the wind. The battle was far from over. The journey back to the surface felt surreal, as if the forest itself held its breath, watching the guardians emerge from the ancient labyrinth of roots and stone. Each step they took carried the weight of what they had faced, the cleansing of the hollow's heart, but also the burden of knowing their battle was far from over. The soft light filtering through the canopy above seemed both a welcome balm and a fragile promise, one that could be shattered in an instant. Mark's presence, though distant and tethered to the fracture, lingered in their minds. His sacrifice had given them a lifeline, but the toll on his spirit was visible in the quiet moments they shared, silent glances, unspoken fears. Elise was the first to voice what they all felt. "We've touched the core of the hollow's pain," she said softly, "but it's only a beginning. The fracture may be mended, but the hollow itself is still hungry." Miriam nodded. "And with the black convergence approaching, its hunger will only grow fiercer." Back at their base, the guardians found little respite. The weight of their victory was tempered by new threats rising in the shadows. The artifact pulsed faintly on the altar, a reminder that the hollow's reach stretched far beyond the forest's edge. Hannah pored over her journal, her mind restless. The ancient texts hint at something darker, an entity that feeds not only on pain but on the very essence of life and hope. It's the true heart of the hollow's hunger. Jordan, ever the pragmatist, gritted his teeth. "We've faced creatures and shadows, but this is something different. Something that could unravel everything we've fought for." The new allies they had gathered, hunters, scholars, mystics, moved with a cautious urgency, their own fears mirrored in their eyes. Trust remained fragile, but the growing threat forced them to unite. One evening, as the forest shuddered under a rising wind, a stranger arrived, an old woman cloaked in tattered robes, her eyes bright with a fierce light. She introduced herself as Seraphine, a seer who had watched the hollows spread for decades. Seraphine's words chilled the guardians to their core. The black convergence is more than a fracture aligning. It is a convergence of souls, lost, broken, and consumed by the hollow. It will open a gate, a passage through which the darkness will flood the world. She turned her gaze to Mark's resting place. "Your friend's sacrifice is a beacon, but it will not hold forever. The true battle lies ahead." The group spent long nights preparing, weaving new wards, and forging alliances with ancient spirits of the forest. They delved deeper into forgotten magic, seeking a way to strengthen Mark's bond and delay the convergence. Yet the forest grew restless. Creatures once thought defeated returned, twisted shadows that stalked the night, their eyes glowing with malice. Storms bent reality, tearing at the edges of their world. Amid the growing chaos, the guardians faced fractures within themselves. Doubts, fears, and old wounds surfaced. The strain threatened to tear them apart even as the darkness closed in. One night, Hannah confided in Elise, her voice barely above a whisper. "I fear we're losing more than just the battle. We're losing ourselves." Elise nodded, eyes tired but resolute. "That is the hollow's greatest weapon, despair. But we must hold on. For Mark, for the forest, for the world." As the black convergence drew near, the guardians steeled themselves for the final confrontation. They were scarred and weary, but their bonds, though tested, held fast. The lost campground beneath the pines waited, silent and watchful, as the storm of darkness gathered on the horizon. The wind howled through the towering pines like the restless cries of forgotten souls, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and distant thunder. The forest had grown colder, shadows deeper, as if the land itself was bracing for a storm unlike any before. The black convergence was approaching, an event whispered about only in legend and nightmare, and its weight pressed down on the guardians with a suffocating inevitability. Inside their base, the air was thick with tension. Maps and ancient texts were spread across tables, candles flickering against the encroaching darkness. The guardians moved with a focused urgency, each aware that time was slipping through their fingers like smoke. Seraphine, the seer, stood before them, her gaze sharp and unyielding. The convergence is not just a moment, she warned. It is a flood, a rising tide of shadows, memories, and lost souls. When it comes, the barrier between worlds will thin to a fragile thread. Her voice carried the weight of years spent watching the hollow's slow, insidious spread. We must be ready, not just to defend, but to confront the source. The entity that feeds on pain is also the gatekeeper to the hollow's true heart. Elise paced the room, her mind racing. We've cleansed the fracture's heart beneath the forest, but that was a symptom, not the disease. The source is deeper, older, more powerful. Miriam's eyes darkened with resolve. Then we find it. Before the convergence. The preparations were exhaustive. Protective wards were strengthened and layered like armor around their camp. Ancient relics were polished and charged with magic. New allies arrived, mystics with secrets of their own, warriors hardened by loss, and scholars who spoke in riddles and warnings. Mark's condition remained fragile. Though his body rested, his spirit battled the ever-encroaching shadows within the fracture. The artifact pulsed steadily on the altar, a heartbeat in the darkness, tethering him to their world but also a beacon for the hollow's hunger. One night, as the guardians gathered around a flickering campfire beneath the starless sky, Seraphine revealed a secret that sent ripples of unease through them all. There is a place, she said, voice low, where the veil is thinnest beyond the forest, the abyssal hollow. It is the origin of the hollow's curse and the seed of its power. To stop the black convergence, we must journey there and face what lies within. The group exchanged grim looks. The abyssal hollow was spoken of in fearful whispers, an ancient chasm swallowed by shadow, where reality twisted and time unraveled. Jordan clenched his fists. We've faced darkness before, but this is the heart of it. Alyssa swallowed hard. If we fail, everything we love will be lost. Despite the fear, the guardians steeled themselves. The path ahead was perilous, but their resolve burned bright. The forest, though dark and filled with unseen threats, was their home, and they would fight for it with every breath. As they set out toward the abyssal hollow, the forest seemed to close around them once more. Twisted creatures lurked just beyond the firelight, and the air pulsed with ancient magic and menace. Each step took them closer to the edge of the world they knew, a place where the boundary between life and shadow blurred. The deeper they traveled, the more the forest twisted, trees bending like broken bones, and the ground beneath their feet grew unstable, shifting as if alive. Whispers echoed from the darkness, voices of the lost, begging, warning, and tempting. Miriam's chants wove a fragile shield around them, warding off the worst of the hollow's influence, but even her strength was tested. At the edge of a jagged cliff, the abyssal hollow yawned before them, a black maw swallowing the moonlight and stars, a void that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. Elise turned to the group, eyes fierce. Beyond this point, nothing is certain. We face the true heart of the hollow. The guardians steeled themselves, gripping weapons and clutching talismans as they descended into the abyss, their hearts heavy but their spirits unyielding. Beneath the pines, beneath the lost campground, the final battle was about to begin. The air grew colder as the guardians approached the edge of the abyssal hollow, a vast chasm that split the earth like a wound. The darkness inside was absolute, a thick, unnatural blackness that swallowed the faintest flicker of light. Above, the twisted pines bowed as if recoiling from the void below, their skeletal branches creaking eerily in the cold wind. Mark's artifact pulsed sharply in Mark's absence, a silent beacon tethered to his fading spirit deep within the fracture. The guardians felt the pulse like a heartbeat, guiding them through the thickening darkness but also reminding them of the price already paid. Hannah took a steadying breath, gripping the rough stone edge of the cliff. This is it. The source of the hollow's curse. Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with fear and resolve. Elise nodded. The abyss is a place where reality bends, where the shadows grow teeth and memories turn against you. We must stay together, mind and heart, or we will be lost. Jordan checked his blade, eyes scanning the black void. No more mistakes. No more hesitation. We end this. The descent began. The path was a narrow ledge winding down the jagged stone, slick with moisture and covered in sharp roots like grasping fingers. Mist curled from the depths below, cold and clammy, carrying the faintest echo of distant screams and whispers. As they stepped carefully down into the abyss, the light from their lantern struggled against the darkness. Shapes flickered at the edge of vision, twisted forms, half seen and shifting, ghosts of those swallowed by the hollow. Miriam's voice rang out in chant, weaving fragile wards that pushed back the encroaching shadow. Each step forward was a battle of will, fighting back the creeping despair that clawed at their minds. Suddenly, the path crumbled beneath Alyssa's feet. She caught a jagged root, hanging perilously over the void. Hold on. Jordan lunged, grabbing her wrist, muscles straining as he pulled her back to safety. The group exhaled, tension knotting their bodies. The abyss was alive, hostile. Deeper still, the cavern walls twisted, pulsing with an eerie green glow, the sickly light of corrupted magic bleeding from the fractures below. Strange symbols, carved in forgotten tongues, burned faintly into the stone. Elisa's fingers brushed the glowing runes. These marks are warnings, or curses. The hollow defends itself fiercely. Hannah shuddered. It's like the place remembers the battles fought here long ago. Suddenly, the ground trembled violently, and a roar echoed through the cavern, deep, guttural, and full of rage. From the shadows, a massive creature emerged, a twisted amalgam of stone, root, and shadow, its eyes glowing like burning coals. Its breath reeked of decay, and its form shifted like smoke caught in a storm. An ancient guardian corrupted by the hollow, Miriam said grimly. We must fight, or be consumed. The battle was fierce and brutal. Magic flared as Elise and Hannah wove protective spells and launched beams of light. Jordan's blade sang through the air, striking true, while Alyssa moved with fierce grace, striking at the creature's vulnerable points. The cavern shook with each strike, dust and debris falling like rain. Despite their efforts, the creature seemed endless, each wound it bore knitting itself back together, fueled by the abyss's dark power. Desperation clawed at the guardians, but Mark's presence within the fracture lent strength, a faint, guiding light that steadied their hearts. At the moment the creature lunged to deliver a crushing blow, a blinding flash erupted from the artifact in the center of their circle. The creature froze, then shattered into fragments of shadow and stone, dissolving into the darkness. Breathing heavily, the guardians stood among the echoes of battle. The path forward was clear but ominous. Ahead lay the core of the hollow's curse, the place where light and shadow had first torn apart, birthing the fractures that now threatened to consume the world. With resolve burning in their veins, the guardians pressed onward, deeper into the abyss, knowing the fate of all rested on what they would find. The deeper the guardians delved into the abyssal hollow, the heavier the air became. Each breath was a labor, thick with the scent of damp earth, decay, and a strange metallic tang that set their teeth on edge. The cavern walls, once jagged and sharp, softened into curves that seemed to pulse and breathe, as if the hollow itself was alive and watching them. Mark's artifact glowed steadily in the dim light, a cold beacon against the suffocating darkness. It was both their guide and a grim reminder that the sacrifice binding Mark's spirit to the fracture tethered them all to this place, a place where hope and despair fought a silent war. The path ended at a vast chamber, a cathedral of stone and shadow. The ceiling disappeared into an abyssal blackness, and the floor was littered with the remnants of long-forgotten battles, shattered weapons, faded banners, and bones half swallowed by the earth. At the center stood a monolith, towering and covered with ancient glyphs that glowed faintly with a sickly green light. This was the source, the heart of the hollow's curse, where the veil between worlds was thinnest, and the fractures had first torn the fabric of reality. Elise stepped forward, her voice a whisper heavy with reverence and fear. This is the place where the first wound was made. The fracture born from the clash of light and shadow so ancient it has been forgotten by time. Miriam traced the glyphs with a trembling finger. The curse feeds on pain, sorrow, and fear, but it was born from betrayal, a wound inflicted by those who once sought to control the balance between worlds. The guardians formed a circle around the monolith, hands joined. Hannah began the chant, an invocation to bind, to heal, to close what had long been open. Her voice wavered but grew stronger as the ancient words filled the chamber, echoing against stone and shadow. But the hollow would not surrender its heart without a final test. The chamber trembled as shadows coalesced into a figure, a being of terrible beauty and agony, shifting between light and darkness. It spoke, voice like 1,000 whispers carried on the wind. "I am the keeper of the fracture," it intoned. "Born from pain, sustained by sorrow, I am the guardian of the hollow's curse. To heal the wound is to undo my existence, to choose between salvation and oblivion." The guardians stood firm but knew that this was more than a battle of strength. It was a trial of their souls. The keeper raised its hands, and visions flooded their minds, memories of betrayal, loss, and desperation from ages past. The guardians saw themselves reflected in those ancient sorrows, their own fears and regrets laid bare. Mark's voice echoed in their minds, "We fight not just to close the fracture, but to heal the wounds within ourselves." The choice was clear but harrowing. To heal the fracture meant sacrifice, of pain, memory, and part of their very essence. To reject it meant the hollow's darkness would consume all. One by one, the guardians stepped forward, offering pieces of themselves, their fears, their regrets, their hopes. The chamber pulsed with light as the fracture began to close, the ancient wounds knitting slowly. But as the final chant rose, the keeper's form shattered, and the chamber began to collapse. The guardians ran, heart pounding, through crumbling stone and falling shadows, clutching the last threads of the healed fracture. Outside, the first light of dawn touched the lost campground beneath the pines. The forest seemed to breathe easier, the shadows retreating for now. Mark's body stirred, eyes fluttering open, a faint smile on his lips. The battle was won, but the scars remained. The hollow's hunger was stilled, but the memory of pain endured. The guardians stood together, their bond stronger, their spirits tempered by sacrifice. And beneath the pines, the lost campground found peace, at least for a time. The first light of dawn spilled gently through the pines, filtering down in golden shafts that kissed the damp earth and stirred the lingering mist. The forest exhaled, as if releasing a breath held for centuries. The air was lighter, the oppressive weight of shadow and sorrow lifted, at least for now. The fractures had been sealed, the hollow's heart silenced, but the cost was etched deeply into the souls of the guardians. Mark lay on a bed of moss beneath the tallest pine, his eyes fluttering open. The faint pulse of the artifact resting beside him was softer, less insistent, its duty fulfilled. His breath was shallow, but steady, and as his gaze met the gentle morning light, a flicker of peace softened his features. Hannah sat nearby, watching over him with a mixture of relief and worry. The days since the ritual had been a whirlwind of exhaustion and healing, both physical and spiritual. She traced the lines of his face, her fingers trembling. "You're still with us," she whispered, tears shimmering in her eyes. Around the clearing, the guardians moved with quiet purpose. Elise tended to the protective wards, weaving threads of magic that would guard the lost campground long after they had gone. Miriam gathered herbs and flowers, their scents mingling in the crisp morning air, symbols of renewal and hope. Jordan sharpened his blade by the fire, his expression unreadable. The battles had changed him, etched new lines of determination and grief onto his features. Alyssa stood close, watching him with eyes full of questions and unspoken fears. The silence between them was heavy, a fragile thread waiting to be mended. Seraphine, the seer who had guided them through the darkest hours, stepped forward, her gaze sweeping the clearing. "The hollow is quiet," she said softly, "but the forest remembers. The scars we carry are reminders, not just of pain, but of resilience." She turned to the group, voice steady and sure. Your journey has healed the fracture, but healing is not an end. It is a beginning, a chance to rebuild, to protect, and to prepare. The guardians exchanged glances, each feeling the weight of her words. They had faced darkness and survived, but the world beyond the pines was still vast and uncertain. That evening, as twilight descended and shadows stretched long across the forest floor, the group gathered around the campfire once more. The flames flickered, casting warm light and deep shadows, dancing like spirits among the trees. Elise broke the silence. We must rebuild, not just the forest, but the bonds between us. The hollow thrives on division and fear. Our strength lies in unity. Miriam nodded. And in remembering. The lost campground was once a place of gathering, of life and stories. We must restore that spirit. Jordan finally spoke, his voice rough but honest. The battles changed us all. But we're still here. Still fighting. That counts for something. Alyssa reached for his hand, a small but powerful gesture. Together. Hannah smiled faintly, pulling her journal close. I will write our story, the true story, so the hollow's darkness cannot twist it into legend and lies. As night deepened and stars glittered above, the guardians shared their hopes, fears, and dreams. They spoke of the future, of protecting the forest, of honoring Mark's sacrifice, and of the fragile peace they had won. Yet, beneath the calm, a quiet ripple stirred, a subtle shift in the shadows beyond the trees. The hollow's hunger was not gone. It slumbered, patient and waiting. But for now, beneath the pines, the lost campground breathed again. A place of light, of stories, and of the unyielding spirit of those who dared to fight the darkness. The days that followed the sealing of the hollow's fracture were a fragile balance between hope and lingering unease. The forest around the lost campground thrummed with new life, young shoots pushed through the mossy earth, and birdsong returned to the canopy like a gentle balm for weary souls. Yet beneath this surface of renewal, shadows still whispered, memories of pain and loss etched into the very soil. The guardians divided their efforts between healing the land and healing themselves. The physical wounds from their battles were tending to, but the invisible scars, etched in memories and dreams, proved more stubborn. Hannah found herself restless, unable to stay in one place for long. Each night, she retreated to the edge of the forest, notebook in hand, recording every whispered legend, every fleeting memory of the hollow's ancient curse. Her writing became a ritual, a way to bind the past and present, to ensure the truth was never lost. Elise spent hours communing with the forest spirits, reaching out to the ancient guardians of the land who had once watched over the lost campground. She sought their guidance, hoping to weave a protective web that would endure beyond the magic of rituals and artifacts. Miriam cultivated the healing gardens, using herbs and roots to mend not just wounds but to strengthen the body's spirit. She taught the community the ancient art of herbal medicine, passing on knowledge that had nearly been forgotten. Jordan and Alyssa worked side by side, rebuilding the structures that once welcomed travelers and wanderers. Each nail hammered and log placed was an act of defiance against the darkness that had tried to claim the forest. The community slowly grew, as word spread of the lost campground's revival. People came, those drawn by the stories, by the hope, and by the need to stand against the creeping shadows beyond the trees. Yet, even as life flourished, the guardians remained vigilant. The hollow's hunger had been stilled, but it was not gone. Strange phenomena unsettled the nights, phantom footsteps, distant wails carried on the wind, and fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures slipping between the trees. One evening, as a silver moon hung low in the sky, Seraphine gathered the guardians around a quiet fire. Her eyes, sharp despite the passing years, held a new urgency. There are echoes, she said slowly, residual threads of the hollow's curse that persist. They cling to places touched by sorrow and betrayal, fragments of pain that survived the fracture's sealing. She paused, then continued. If left unchecked, these echoes could unravel the peace we have fought to create. The guardians understood the task ahead was not only to protect the forest but to seek out these echoes and lay them to rest. Over the following weeks, they ventured beyond the safety of the campground, into the deeper woods and forgotten hollows. Each journey was a test of courage and resolve. Ancient curses, restless spirits, and twisted creatures haunted these places. In one such journey, Hannah stumbled upon an old, collapsed shrine deep in the forest. The stone altar was cracked, covered in moss and lichen, but the faint glow of a protective rune pulsed beneath the grime. As they cleared the debris, the guardians uncovered inscriptions telling of an ancient pact between the forest spirits and the first guardians of the hollow. It was a pact of balance, a promise to protect the veil between worlds and to honor the pain and sacrifices made. The discovery renewed their resolve. The fight was not just against darkness but for the memory and honor of those who came before. Back at the campground, nights grew warmer, and the laughter of children echoed between the trees. The lost campground was no longer a place of fear but a beacon of hope, a sanctuary for those seeking light in shadow. Yet, as the stars wheeled overhead, the guardians knew that the hollow's hunger was patient and cunning. The battle to protect their world would never truly end. And so, beneath the pines, beneath the watchful sky, the guardians stood, keepers of light, bearers of memory, and warriors of the night. The forest was quiet that night, as if holding its breath. The air was cool and crisp, filled with the scent of pine and earth, but beneath the surface, a tension simmered, unseen but deeply felt. The guardians gathered one last time at the heart of the lost campground, their faces illuminated by the flickering firelight and the steady glow of Mark's artifact, now dimmed but never extinguished. It had been months since the hollow's fracture was sealed, and yet the echoes of that battle lingered. The scars ran deep, not just in the forest, but within each of them. Mark's sacrifice had saved their world, but it left a hollow in their hearts, a reminder that even victory demanded a price. Hannah spoke first, her voice steady but soft. "We've come so far. The forest breathes again, and new life blooms where once there was only shadow. But we can't forget what brought us here. The hollow feeds not just on pain, but on forgetting." She looked around at the faces she had come to trust as family. "We are the memory, the light that will never fade." Elise stepped forward, her eyes reflecting the fire's glow. "The pact we uncovered, the promise between spirits and guardians, reminds us that balance is fragile. Our duty doesn't end with a single battle. It is ongoing, a legacy we must carry forward." Miriam added, "Healing is a journey. The forest will test us again, and when it does, we must be ready, not just with magic or weapons, but with hope and unity." Jordan, who had grown quieter but no less fierce, clenched his fists. "The darkness is patient. It waits for cracks to show, for fear and doubt to take root. But we won't give it that chance." Alyssa nodded, her hand finding his in the firelight. "Together, we're stronger than any shadow." Seraphine, the seer whose guidance had been their compass through the darkest times, raised her staff. "The last light burns not in fire or spell, but in the hearts of those who refuse to surrender. That light is you." She turned to the glowing artifact at the center of the circle. "Mark's spirit remains with us, a beacon and a bond. As long as we remember, he is never truly gone." The fire crackled, sending sparks dancing into the night sky. The forest seemed to lean in, listening to their vow. Then, as if in answer, a gentle breeze stirred the branches overhead. Leaves shimmered in the moonlight, and for a moment, the lost campground felt whole, alive with the pulse of life and memory intertwined. But peace was a gift hard-won. The guardians knew their story would be told in whispers, in campfire tales, in the songs of the forest. They were the keepers of that story, the last light against an ancient darkness. As dawn approached, they stood together, hands joined, hearts bound by the sacrifices and hopes that shaped their world. The hollow's hunger might never be fully sated, but beneath the pines, the lost campground stood as a testament to resilience, courage, and the enduring power of light. And as the sun's first rays touched the forest floor, the guardians stepped forward, into the future they had fought so hard to protect.